Yo, 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 amigos, players, playerettes, dudettes, welcome to another fine episode. And this one's a episode, no matter which way you look at it, it's the same number, 69. I've heard about something I've heard about. I'm not sure what it is, but yeah, whether you turn the 6 or the 9 upside down, it's the same number.
Yeah, what's the number after 68 and the one before 70? Let's just leave it at that.
So we are back once again. This is obviously I'm the highest. I'm the most famous unpaid brand ambassador for Tommy Bahama, Morgan Wright, here literally with my partner in crime,
Steve Murphy, but everybody calls me Murph. And welcome back, everybody.
Welcome, Murph man. Hey, and this is going to be fun. This one. Actually, Steve, we'll get into this next episode in a minute, but this one actually came from one of our listeners, somebody that came out of listening to Mark Comboy's episode about the shootout in Colby, Kansas. So this one's going to be fun. Before we get to it, the script says I'm supposed to do housekeeping. Thank you for joining us, small talk. Now housekeeping. So, hey, head on over to Apple Review, those 5 stars, and Spotify. It really helps us out, guys, a lot. We really appreciate it. Give your comments in there. Let us know about the episodes, kind of content you're looking for. We really want to try and figure out what you're interested in, what keeps this thing going. So, just help us out over there. Also, head on over to our website, gameofcrimespodcast.com. That's where you'll find books, especially from the one that we're coming up now. So that's everything there. Our mailing list is there. So we'll put our information there. Also, follow us on that thing called social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. But Murph, where do you got to be, especially after this weekend? Because you're about to get a storm. You may not be here after this. So, but where do you got to be? Where do you got to be?
Well, because of the storm, I have to be in California the midweek. So I'm getting ready to change my flights to try to get out of here before the hurricane pain in the ass gets here. But where you got to be with the show is on Patreon, our subscriber channel. We've got buttloads of good content over there. Come and check us out. See what you like. If there's things on there you don't like, let us know. We'll consider changing things. I mean, this is all about entertaining you and giving you guys information about us, from us, through us. We're open to suggestions always. So that's why your ratings are so important.
And your feedback on the episodes and stuff. So we just as we are recording this, we do just in time intros, outros for our episodes. So as we're recording this, episode 6 of the Real DEA Narcos, talking about the Real DEA Narcos Cali edition, just dropped. And this one with Dave and Chris, the boys, we review the first 3 episodes of season 3 of Narcos. What works, what didn't, what they thought was accurate. Very interesting stuff. So you got to listen to that. 911, what's your emergency? So we got a ton of stuff coming out. As Murph said, just go over, give us a shot. And once you get hooked, we're kind of like an addictive drug. It's like Belgian beer. Once you try one, you got to have 2.
Right. It's kind of like getting a colonoscopy. When you want one, when you get one, you want another.
No, you don't. I just got the anesthesiology bill. No, you don't. Okay. What's left of it anyway? All right. But by the way, seriously, if you're over 50, go get one. Join the club, pals. Join the club.
Seriously, true.
Yeah. Hey, and head on over to paypal.com and use our email, Game of Crimes. Oh, actually, I forgot to tell you, this is where you go find us. Patreon.com/Game of Crimes. We almost got past it without telling people where to find us. Patreon.com/Game of Crimes. We got to do it with that reverb in there to kind of add the announcer effect.
It's been a busy weekend.
Oh boy, I just got back last night doing something kind of stealthy. It'll be on television here in a while, but we'll talk about that later. PayPal.com. Use our email, gameofcrimespodcast@gmail.com or paypal.me/Game of Crimes, whatever it makes it easier for you to support the show. Now, before we get started, got to tell you something. Folks, just head on over to Facebook. Go find Game of Crimes fans, run by our favorite mafia queen, Sandy Salvato. Give it a shot. Answer 2 questions. You just got to be remotely in the ball field. If you can write at least a semi-coherent sentence in English, there is a good chance you'll be admitted to the club.
You qualify.
You qualify. You have a heartbeat and a Facebook account, folks. But just go do it. Because we pull a lot of our content for Small Town Police Blotter, which we're getting ready to talk about here in a minute, from you folks there and some of our stories and our Q&A. So head on over there. But again, as always, this is a show about crime. We talk about bad people doing bad things and bad people doing bad things to good people. We do take the stories seriously, but
as you know, we never take ourselves serious. I mean, we're kind of... Well, Morgan's an idiot, and I just kind of hang out with him.
Oh, please. I'm not an idiot. I'm a moron. There's a difference.
Oh, there you go. Well, okay, I got the idiot thing. You got the moron. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, but Murph, before we can find out which of us is the idiot or the moron, I got to ask you one question. Guess what time it is?
I bet it's time for
Small Town Police Blotter. Yay! And speaking of, remember, this comes from our Game of Crimes fans. Liz Calise comes up with another one. And Murph, guess what? It's from Florida.
Yeehaw!
From Sebastian, Florida, population 25,054.
Salute.
Actually, 25,054 minus 2 here in just a minute. So, Steve, if you've just gone to Walmart and you've stolen a big 75-inch, flat screen TV, what's probably the next thing you're probably going to do?
Well, you want to get away and not get caught.
Yeah, not these guys. So, the
They
Sebastian
went back for more or what?
Well, hold on here. They worked up an appetite. The Sebastian Police Department received a call from a store employee about 2 men who tried to load a large television into a black Cadillac Escalade, which fell out as they drove away. They located the SUV at the restaurant, at a fast food restaurant, and questioned the 2 men. During the questioning, the police discovered yet another television in the back of the vehicle. 2 gentlemen aged 23 and 21, both from Palm Bay, said they were trying to return the TV to Walmart. But what happened was the loss prevention officer saw that they were attempting to leave with another television. They tried to show him a receipt, which didn't work, so they exited the store, pushed the television into the vehicle, yelling, "Go, go, go," as the loss prevention officer was following them. As they were leaving, the TV fell out of the rear because the door wasn't closed, but that didn't faze them. They went next door to Taco Bell, where they were apprehended.
Well, have you seen those commercials where like the goalie's playing and you hear that dong?
Go!
They heard the dong and they
Yo, get on Taco Bell. Ding. Oh, let's go to Taco Bell. That's what happened. That was the sound when the TV hit the pavement. It went ding dong.
Yeah, people are just such idiots.
Now they are. No, Steve. Let's. We don't know who's the idiot or the moron here, but let's not confuse them with us. Anyway.
Yeah.
Steve, you ever had remember when your kids were growing up, and they were fussy, they didn't want to go to bed and didn't do stuff?
Yeah.
Did you ever call the police on them?
No, one of my kids threatened to call the police on me one time. I told her, I am the police.
I am the police. 1:39 a.m. Yelling coming from a Colonial Village home was determined to be a child being put to bed and being fussy.
So what happened?
Don't know. That was it. It's like, why are you calling the cops to put you? And why is it 1:39 in the morning?
Exactly. I could say, is that failure to parent or
I don't.
When you're a parent, you can be your kid's friend to a degree, but you got to be the parent first.
Got to be the parent. And I never liked it when you walk by the parents and they go, "Oh, be good, or the policeman's going to put you in jail." And I would walk and say, "I'm not going to put you in jail. If mommy or daddy do anything to you, I'm going to put them in jail." So there you go.
Yeah. That used to tick me off too, because they portray you to be the bad guy, and little kids are just excited to see cops in the uniforms. It's not you; it's the uniform that they like
used to be anyway. Well, hopefully they will get back to that point. But Steve,
yeah.
We're almost upon Halloween season, right? It's pretty close, just around the corner, right?
I bet you're going to dress up Tommy Bahama, aren't you?
I do have some pumpkin-flavored Tommy Bahama, yeah. We will talk about it. However, though, at 8:51 a.m.
So wrong to say.
A pumpkin was taken from the property and returned fully carved on Mountain View Drive.
Well, they returned it. What's the problem?
Why would you report that? Why would you report that?
That's just somebody doing the messy work for you.
Okay, last one for this before we move on, Steve.
Okay.
You've had. Hey, look, I've been the victim of butt dialing, and you've probably been butt dialed somebody, right? You stick the phone in there you didn't mean to, or your thumb hits it, and you dial somebody.
Knock on wood, I haven't done it, but I've had it done to me.
Yeah, well, don't make sure that when you're doing it, you're not these guys, that you call a neighboring 911 county, pocket dialed 911 from an adjacent county with male subject telling his friends he was high looking for a charger and wanted to just do laundry and eat ramen noodles.
You know what? These people, they bring a bad name to us idiots. Well, they got to come up with a different name for them.
We do. They're in a class by themselves. Well, thus into the reading for today. P.A.S. Udamine Dana Eis Requiem. All right, so that is the end for this one. And the morons there in Florida. I guess that's what happens when you steal a TV. You got to, build your strength back up. You got to go to Taco Bell and eat.
Idiot. I just... This stuff qualifies for our Patreon channel. You can't make this shit up.
You cannot. By the way, though, speaking of stuff you can't make the shit up, we can't make up this next story because it's really, really true. And it comes to us courtesy of Aaron Burke. So when we did Mark Conboy's episode in the shootout in Colby with the four people, Danny Rometta, Lisa Dunn, Mark Walters, and James Hunter, she's from Colby, Kansas. She was a kid growing up during the time when these shootings happened, when these people were killed, really affected her. She's working on a book. So she had reached out to me because we had some information in the podcast she wasn't aware of. When we were back visiting family, I actually had the chance to meet her. We met, went over her book. I helped her, structured it, showed her where to go, like get court records and stuff, things like that. And so later on, just kind of out of the blue, she says, hey, this is just kind of as a funny story. She sent it to me, and it was about the world's largest LSD operation had been run out of a missile silo in Wamego, Kansas. And I know where Wamego is because growing up as a Ute in Chapman, Kansas, Wamego was one of our schools in the North Central Kansas League, the NCKL, the Nickel. And I'm going, you got to be kidding. So as we got researching this, what did we find out, Murph? You knew the guy.
Yeah. And his name is Guy, as a matter of fact, Guy Hargreaves. And it's funny because Guy and I talked about his book several years ago, I think it was. And he was looking for an introduction to see if there might be any interest in a potential movie. And I think I made some phone calls, and I tell you, we try to help people out, but these producers just are not good at all about calling people back.
They ghost you. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was, I'm glad you did that because, I mean, you brought it up and then it rang that bell and we reached out to Guy and holy cow.
Was it like the Taco Bell bell? Dong. And then you dong.
Well, I didn't go to Taco Bell, but yeah, it was.
But what was really cool is, there's so many connections to this, at least for me personally, because out of Kansas, but it never made the news. This happened about the time I was in Virginia, and you think something like that would make the news, but it didn't. But Steve, you did some interesting research. We found a poll. When they made the arrest of these guys, they figured out that they were responsible for 90% of the world's LSD production?
Yep. And it's backed up by statistics. After they went to jail, availability dropped. This is one of the most significant impact cases I've ever heard in my life. And you're right. Nobody understands why it didn't get the publicity it deserved.
Well, let's give it a little bit of publicity this time now. And, we want to, so what we'll do is we'll dive into this episode. This is a strange episode. LSD out of a missile silo in north central Kansas. I mean, you can't make this shit up. And so for us to believe it and hear it, I got to ask you one question, Murph. Are you ready to blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, I'm ready.
I'm ready. It was a long night. Anyway, by the way, Notre Dame won. Yay. And the Kansas State Wildcats beat Oklahoma. Yay.
But how many games has Notre Dame won this year so far?
2. They're 2-2. So they're back to 500. So.
Oh, I thought I thought this was their first win.
No, this is their second win.
Okay.
Yeah, but now you've ruined kind of my
sorry,
my mojo here. So I have to ask you once again, Murph, are you ready to play the biggest, baddest, most dangerous, and missile silo friendly game of all, the game of crimes?
Absolutely. And listen, if you've ever tried LSD, we're going to pray for you. You might have a flashback in this episode. So get in, sit down, shut up, and hold on. Guy, tell us your story, brother. If a shit or a damn or a fuck comes out, it's okay.
Okay.
And that's on the record too, Murph. There you go. Thank you very much.
Is this live or recorded for later?
Recorded.
Well, I hope you're live, but we're recording this for later. Yes.
Okay. That's what I want to check.
No. We're not broadcasting live to the world. And don't worry, if you say anything you don't want to, we'll edit it out for a fee.
I'm trying not to eat cat food in retirement here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. We got a real quick joke too. I remember a guy was telling me some sales training stuff. He said, hey, look, if you really want to get good at selling stuff, it's like an optometrist did one time. Guy walks into the optometrist's office. He says, look, when somebody walks in, they look at you, they say, how much is an eye exam? You say $125. And if they don't flinch, you say per eye. There you go. There's your joke for the. Hey guys, we already got started, as you can see. So before we get too much, we got to welcome to the show. This guy has a varied background. I don't think he could hold a job. We're going to talk about Dallas, DEA, writing for the FBI, polygraphing for the CIA. I mean, welcome to the show, Guy Hargreaves.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a real honor.
It's an honor to have you on here, brother. This is a retired DEA agent. You forgot to include that part, Morgan.
No, I said DEA.
Did you?
Yeah,
Well,
you're
maybe I
just getting
forgot to
old,
listen.
Murph. You're sleeping.
Well, usually when you talk, I don't listen very closely, so sorry. But Guy, it's an honor to have you on here, brother. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, and it's great to have you back.
Well, thank you.
Well, and the cool part too is this: you came to us by way of we did a podcast episode with a guy I used to work with on the state patrol that was involved in a shootout. These folks went on a multi-state killing spree, killed 4 people, actually 6 people, 4 people in Kansas, a little town called Colby, Kansas. And one of the people listening to it was writing a book. Or is writing a book about it. And she says, "Have you ever heard this story?" And she sent me the story about the missile silo in Wamego, Kansas. And that's how we got started on this whole thing. It's kind of like, well, because I will tell you, you'll find out later. I grew up, I was born at Fort Riley. We moved around the world. I ended up back at Fort Riley, grew up in Chapman. Wamego was one of our conference schools. So I used to go up to Wamego all the time, and we had all those missile silos. All you know the old decommissioned now missile silos. You didn't know they were there, So this is going to be fun. LSD in a missile silo. You guys think we're making this stuff up? No, this is the real deal.
Well, this case wasn't quite as dramatic as what Steve had in Colombia with Pablo Escobar, but this case certainly had the most bizarre characters of any case in DEA history.
Your investigation actually had a positive effect on taking down a drug, and I can't wait to talk about that. We're
going to do that, but Guy, I know you want to hop into it, but we got our own way of doing things. Before we do this, we got to ask you, how did you get involved in this thing of ours? Steve had it all wrong. He kept calling it La Cosa Nostra. As we learned, it's Cosa Nostra. But how did you get involved in this thing we called law enforcement? I mean, was it family? Did you have friends in it, uncles, aunts? How did you get started down this path, including Dallas and CIA and writing for the FBI? So how did this thing start?
Well, it was. When I was growing up, I originally wanted to be a military officer. I was thinking about going to Annapolis Naval Academy, but
I thought you said military.
But as I got older, growing up in Junction City, which is right next to Fort Riley, where you were,
I know it well. Yeah.
And in the 1960s, Junction City was a pretty rough place. I mean, as a teenager in high school, I used to drive my little Chevy Camaro through downtown. There's a place called East 9th Street, and I used to see, literally on Main Street, you'd see people getting mugged. And I kind of came to the realization that crime, and drugs might be as much or a bigger problem for this country than anything, especially with the dwindling threat of the communist empire.
And you know what made it really dangerous down there, too? It was when they used to call when the Eagle landed, when the Eagle crapped, all of those E1s through E3s would take their money and go into Junction City and do a lot of foolish stuff. I mean, there was a lot of prostitution, like you say, a lot of crime. Oh, yeah. And then when I was a Salina cop, we used to work with the MPs on special enforcements because then the soldiers would start getting arrested in Junction City. So they'd start moving over. So they ended up in Salina. So what fun. I didn't realize you grew up in Junction City. Wow.
I'm just, I'm going to take a nap during this interview. When y'all need me, just wake me up. Hit a buzzer.
Well, Murph, that's usually the case. We have to wake you up. By the way, I have Murph's chair set to a taser so I can send a command remotely. No, I'm sorry. We digress there. That was our first digression. If you're following the drinking game, that is drink number 1.
But anyway, my dad was a podiatrist in Junction City. He was a World War II veteran on a PT boat in World War II. And I think he decided to settle in Junction City because all the soldiers, there'd be a lot of foot problems. And I grew up there and went to school at University of Kansas, majored in journalism at the University of Kansas. And that's how I ended. That's how I ended. And of course, Morgan's probably a K-State guy. I don't know, but
well, no, my middle son graduated from Kansas State. I graduated from Fort Hays State.
And anyway, after I majored in journalism, which you may wonder, shouldn't I major in criminal justice or something more law enforcement related? But actually, it was kind of a good degree for being in law enforcement because, as you guys well know, half the work is writing reports. If you can write a DEA 6 without your supervisor having to correct it 3 times, it'll enhance your career a little bit, I think. So after I got my journalism degree, I I worked for the FBI for just 1 year as an editorial clerk on their law enforcement bulletin magazine. And they used to have a program where you worked as a support employee for 3 years, and you go to agents class. And J. Edgar Hoover died. The new director got rid of that program. So I said, there's no sense in sticking around here. And a friend of mine said, you should come to work for Dallas Police Department. As he said, that's one of the two best police departments in the country, that in LA. And I said, well, I'm going to give it a shot. And I really enjoyed it. I tell you, working as a Dallas police officer, people don't realize, federal agents, we have a lot of prestige and everything, but there's more action being a uniformed police officer in a big city than any role in law enforcement. And I just really enjoyed my 3 years with the Dallas Police, or almost 4 years with Dallas Police Department.
So hold on, you don't get to gloss over that much. I mean, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I did 4 years. Okay, let's talk about what possessed you to go to Dallas. I know you said it was your friend. So what was the application process like? How, you're coming out of Kansas, Junction City, Kansas, Geary County, by the way, for you folks keeping track. By the way, I have to give credit to Alex Campbell. Steve, Alex Campbell came up with that drinking game. Like if we say I digress and back to our regularly scheduled podcast. So Alex gets credit for that. But how did you find out about Dallas, or was it just through your friend?
A good friend of mine, Joe Milligan. I told him I was leaving the FBI because it wasn't much of a future there since they got rid of that program, and he convinced me that Dallas was the best police department to go to. And well, it's a big city police department. I wanted to get some action, and
so you moved out to
sure
Washington D.C. first.
Yes, I was in D.C. for 1 year after college, and then 4 years in Dallas, Texas.
So tell us about applying for Dallas PD. Like, how long did it take you to get on?
Well, I was really lucky. They were in a big hiring frenzy because Dallas was growing like crazy, and it only took a few months to get hired. I mean, I think it was only 3 or 4 months. Of course, I had to take a polygraph. I had to do the usual background investigation and interviews, and it was.
Didn't you go through that for the FBI when you got hired there?
No, because at the FBI, I was a support employee. I wasn't an agent. So, I mean, they did an interview with me, but there wasn't a polygraph. Well, actually, I don't. FBI didn't used to polygraph like CIA polygraphs.
Oh, Robert
Yeah,
Ganston.
yeah, and people don't realize 95% of the people who get disapproved from CIA in the hiring process are from polygraph, not background investigations, because you find out nobody knows what crime somebody's done more than they know themselves. You interview a neighbor doesn't really know what that guy's doing. Polygraph people don't realize how effective polygraph is.
Yeah, we used to find out on polygraphs. And the other thing too that got a lot of people uh, uh, thrown out of the process. You lie about something that would otherwise not disqualify you for employment, but you lied about it, and the fact you lied about it in the polygraph is what disqualified you for employment. And we used to tell people for you going for your polygraph, be truthful about everything. And it's like, well, I lied about doing this. That wouldn't have disqualified you, but the fact that you lied, guess what?
Now you got an integrity issue.
Yep.
I could tell you, although after being a polygraph examiner, you get to where you hardly believe anybody. you, know, you hear so many lies after a year of doing that job, and you makes you a little cynical. It's kind of like a combination of being a priest and a confessional and a police officer and a military officer, all three, if you're CIA, because you're checking, international stuff and but it's an amazing experience, but it's also very stressful. I found it more stressful than being a DEA agent because in DEA and like police work, you may have 30 seconds of total terror, but then it's kind of whereas with polygraph, I mean, you're 8 hours a day and they're face to face, people screaming at you and crying, and it's a rough job.
Holy cow! Give us a timeline of your career. So you went to you went to DC in what year with the Bureau?
I was with right out of college in 1977. It would have been May of 77. I graduated. Then I went to work for the FBI for just 1 year. And then right after that, I went to the Dallas Police Department for 4 years, 3.5, 4 years. And
so let's stop there for a second. Let's just drill down a little bit on Dallas. So when you got hired on, you said you got hired on, you went through the academy. How many people were in your class when you went through that?
I think it was like 35, 40 officers. We went through the academy and training and everything. And they did a real good job. The academy was, I think it was like 6 months long. It was a long academy. It was
Did
longer
you
than it
have to
was in
stay
DE.
at the academy, or were you living in Dallas and going back and forth each
Yeah,
day?
you didn't stay at the academy like you do with DEA and FBI. You lived at home, but you had to come every morning and report for 8 hours. And they made us run 2 miles every day, and they had a pretty good training program.
So you get out, right? You do your field training program. So what's it like once you first get out on your own in a uniform and a patrol car, and it's Guy Hargreaves, officer at large? What was that like being in Dallas?
Well, it's funny you'd ask that question because my first experience being alone was a terrible one. I mean, I had a guy naked walking down the middle of the street in Dallas. He was high on PCP, phencyclidine, which is the worst drug out there, in my opinion, of any of them. Because I mean,
And
they
that's why he was naked too. Most
yeah,
people
yeah.
on PCP, when they get dusted, I got to take my clothes off.
Well, they get hot and they sweat and they get crazy and violent. And, so here I am, a rookie cop. I'd been with a trainer for 6 months, but this was only like the third day that I was by myself, and the sun was just coming up, and I'm driving in a squad car in Dallas rush hour traffic. And I look up and there's this naked guy walking down the middle of the road, about 6'2", and cars are honking their horns, and I had a car in front of me and behind me, so I couldn't move my car. And he came walking up to the window, and I rolled the window down, and he looked at me and started screaming. And fortunately, I reached over at that moment to grab the microphone on Motorola radio, and he swung through the window and hit me in the back of the head, started screaming. I was, MFing me
Oh.
and the whole works. And then he crawls through the window and he's trying to grab my gun. And I'm screaming. This is a real funny story because I'm
And it was
screaming.
at this point, Guy Hargrave says, "What the hell am I doing in Dallas, Texas?"
Exactly. And so I get on the microphone. The funny part, I'm screaming, "Help, help, there's a naked man in my car." And and
And it's
female
not me. It's not me.
and a female officer, she gets on the radio and says, "Where are you at? I want to see this." And I'm, "No, I'm serious." And I'm screaming. I'm hitting him on the head with the microphone, and so anyway, fortunately, I got a hold of his hair. He had an afro, and a big afro, and I started banging his head into the corner of that Motorola radio several times. It wasn't even hardly phasing him because he was on PCP. But if finally I hit him enough times that it kind of disoriented him, and I threw him out the window. But before I did that, cars were honking and laughing because his naked butt was sticking out the window of my car.
Oh, were there camera phones out that time?
God, I wish they would have had. We didn't have cameras in those days. This was way back in 1978,
And you
79.
were just going to gloss over all of this and get right to something else. And there is magic in the footnotes here, man.
Well, we need to know how this culminated. What happened next?
So anyway, it gets even crazy. It was like something out of a Keystone Cops episode because I threw him out the window, and I should have just jumped out and put him in a chokehold or something. But I threw him out the window, and I reached over to grab my nightstick, and while I did that, he jumped up on the car hood and he started leapfrogging on cars that were backed up and pray. So I'm on the, if you can imagine a police officer with a nightstick, I'm chasing him across car hoods, and every time I swing the nightstick, he leapfrogs to the next car, and people are laughing and honking their horns. And
This sounds
finally,
like a video game.
yeah, and
This
finally I had
version
to
of whack-a-mole.
finally I had to chase him for like half a mile before I caught him. And I finally caught him, and thank God there's an officer, Jesse Trevino, showed up, and he was a Golden Gloves boxer, and I had him in a hold, and Jesse helped me out, and we got him in handcuffs, and now Jesse's holding one end of him, I'm holding his legs, and we're carrying this naked man down the road, and cars keep.
Wait a minute. Holding which end of him? He's naked. Let's be clear about this.
Well,
That's
he was
not
so
an end,
well
that's in the
endowed,
middle.
I probably could have mistook it for a leg. But we anyway, each of us were carrying him, and cars driving by honking and people laughing, and so anyway, that was my initiation to law enforcement.
Oh, this is one of the best stories we've had. We're up in the episode in the 60s range, and this is one of the best, funniest stories we've ever had.
It is. Well, it's got to be the most fascinating opening story we've ever had. If somebody says, "Yeah, my first day was kind of interesting." What? Ah, naked dude on PCP hops through my car. We have never had that.
For our listeners, just so you understand, PCP, it's like it gives you superhuman strength. You don't feel pain. I mean, I've heard stories of people on PCP being shot multiple times and still coming on strong. They just endure the pain, or they don't even know that they're in pain. So it's extremely dangerous to go up against somebody, especially one-on-one when they're on PCP. Angel dust, right?
Yeah. And they used to
What they
put it
call
on the
being
marijuana.
dusted.
They used to spray it on marijuana. So you might think you're smoking a joint and you end up being high on phencyclidine,
Jeez. Man, oh man.
Well, that's going to be hard to top that story.
I know, what a story. Okay, so what nickname did you get out of that when that was all over? I know the cops gave you a nickname.
Oh, actually, I'm lucky they didn't. But they were razzing me for months about that.
Oh,
Hey, you got any more? Hey, guy, have you got any more naked men jumping in your car?
That's funny.
I just thought it was funny. The female officer go, "Where's he at? I'll be right there."
Yeah.
It wasn't
Thought you were joking or
it
what?
wasn't officer needs assistance or 1099 or 1013 or whatever the 10 code you guys were using down there for officer needs help. It's like, I got a naked man in the car.
Well, when you get under stress and you panic, you just start screaming. Hey, help!
Absolutely.
You don't think about the code number.
Oh my God! I'm sorry. Okay, podcast is over. This is going to be a completely separate podcast up until this point. The Guy Hargreaves and the Naked Man.
There you go. That's probably going to be the title of the show.
Well, let's hope not. We got a little ways to go here. Okay, so that one's probably tough. Now, you probably ended up being involved in some real hairy stuff too. Get it, Harry? See, work that in. Joke.
I fell asleep again. You started talking. I fell asleep. Sorry.
Yeah, but were you just on patrol the whole time, or did you move into a different unit down at Dallas before you left?
I was on patrol for the first 2.5 years. And then because I had a journalism degree, they had me do the 100th anniversary history yearbook for Dallas Police for the chief. But I actually enjoyed being a lot in the field more than doing that. But we had some at that time. Dallas was a lot of shootings, a lot of action going on. I got in actually, but for the grace of God, I'm so lucky. I had one shooting. I had a burglar pulled a knife on me and I shot him in the hip. And then it was only a few weeks later, my partner and I, we rolled up. They said there was a guy shooting up a bar. And ironically, it was the hole in the wall bar. It had a Western theme with like bullet holes painted on the outside of the bar. And like we roll up, my partner, Fred Smith, and I, and there's a group of Mexicans there in a circle, about 10 of them. And as soon as we pull up, they break like a cubby of quail and start running everywhere. And I jump out, and one of them's carrying a big black pistol. It was a Smith & Wesson Model 59, which has like 15-round magazine. And this is the worst scenario. As a law enforcement officer, the worst scenario you can be in is to be chasing a guy who has a gun, because you can't shoot him in the back, and action's quicker than reaction. All he has to do is turn, and he can nail you before you can react. So I'm chasing him, and he runs around the corner of a building, and I turn and look, and he's pointing the gun at me, and click. I was so lucky he had just run out of ammo. He had shot up this bar. And so anyway, I dived into some bushes, and we eventually caught him, and he got arrested and everything. But they had an article about this in the Dallas Morning News, and my brother read it. And I found out later he called my dad, and he said, "Dad, we got to get Guy out of Dallas Police Department. He's going to get killed. This is a second shooting incident he's involved in." And I found out later he came to me and he said, "I'll double your salary. Come to work for me." He had a small exploration oil company in Midland, Texas. So he talked me into it because I had a daughter, and I thought, well, I think he's going to double my salary. I was really reticent to leave law enforcement, but I did it. So I worked for him for a year as a petroleum landman out in West Texas. And I said, Greg, I don't have a geology degree or petroleum engineering. I don't know what to do, And he said, well, you're an investigator. You just go to find out who owns the mineral rights for us. So anyway, I did this for about a year. And then he and his wife got a divorce, and his wife got half the company. And then about 3 months after that, the price of oil dropped from $40 to $14 a barrel. And I said, Greg, you can't afford to have me working for you anymore. And I went back to grad school at the University of Texas to get a master's degree in petroleum land management. And while I was there, I really missed law enforcement. I really missed it. As you know, once it gets in your heart, you don't get rich, but you has, it's a real adrenaline rush. And I saw an ad in the newspaper. It's just a fluke at the campus newspaper, University of Texas, for the CIA. And I thought, well, that would be pretty exciting. Unbeknownst to me at the time, CIA is not law enforcement, but I can talk more about that. But anyway, I got lucky on the exam, and I got hired by the CIA as an agent in the Office of Security.
And I worked. Okay, hold on. You're glossing over way too much. It's like, okay, I got hired by the CIA, and then me and James Bond went on missions. First of all, did you run into any naked people at the CIA? Because we have a story. We have a story of a lady who went to the CIA looking for Agent Penis. She finally got arrested. No, but hey, let's wheel back though to the process of applying. We've had one other person who's worked for the agency with us, and she started off as a case officer and then went to the FBI. But with you, what was the process like of applying for the FBI? You were more of an overt position, right? So it wasn't like the position wasn't to be a case officer or an intelligence officer.
Well, no, actually, this is what people don't understand. The general public, they think CIA is like Mission Impossible, and you're dangling from wires and evading laser beams and breaking into safes. In reality, it's what people don't understand is there's only about 10% of the CIA who are case officers or spies. Most of them are engineers and analysts and secretaries. And then there's another about 10%, which were in the unit I was, which is called the Office of Security. And the Office of Security is actually the case officers don't carry guns. The Office of Security are the only ones that carry guns. And they are kind of like internal affairs in DEA or FBI. They are the counterintelligence agents. They investigate the agents and moles, and that's why polygraph is so important for CIA, because it's not like in DEA. We have informants. Well, we can always go to trial, and if they commit, they have to tell the truth in trial, or they can have arrest for perjury. Whereas in CIA, you're never going to trial. I mean, this is all covert stuff. So the only way you have a guy, say he's a colonel in the Iraqi Air Force, and we have a case officer who's told him to give you $100,000 to tell us where the Scud missiles in southern Iraq are located. The only way to verify he's telling you the truth is to meet him covertly in a hotel in Vienna or something and give him a polygraph. So polygraph is extremely important for CIA, even to verify that these spies were buying information from or telling the truth, and also to check our own people to see that they aren't becoming moles.
Hey, real quick before you get too far into this, what year did you start at the agency?
I started 1982, and I only worked for 3 years, 1982 to 1985.
Did you ever know a guy named James Olson?
Molson?
James Olson?
Not that I remember.
James ended up being the head of counterintelligence for the CIA before the Alder James case. And that's when it changed too, because then the FBI came in. He was chief of station in Vienna. He was the one that got Clayton Lone Tree approached. But that's what I was going to ask you. That was him and I talked about the Alder James case, about what he was trying to do and some of the things he was prohibited from doing. Because that was an interesting case. But I digress. Drinking game number 2. There you go. Back to our regularly scheduled podcast. So how long did it take you to get on the agency?
That took about I think 6 to 8 months. to get hired. And I tell you, the CIA were actually the toughest hiring process of any of the agencies I ever worked for. Of course, see, when I was with FBI, I was just a support employee. And, they just do an interview. But with CIA, you have a psychological interview, you have a psychiatrist interview you, you have background investigation, and they give you tests, cognitive functions tests. And of course, this was way back in 1982. I don't know if they still, what the process is like now. And then, of course, the toughest part is passing the polygraph.
Did you have to move back to DC for this?
Yeah, yeah, and I went through training in DC. Now, as I was saying earlier, people don't understand that the Office of Security is not spies. They're like internal affairs. They handle the protection for the director, like Secret Service for the director. They have security of the buildings. They install alarms and that type of thing in the buildings. Anything security related, and also doing the background investigations and polygraph exams. But what people don't understand is CIA has no law enforcement authority. You don't have authority to arrest anybody. It's intelligence is a very different world from law enforcement. And, there were a couple times I was guarding Director Casey, and I was armed with a firearm. And I thought to myself, I just realized I don't have any authority to arrest anybody. It's going to be a civilian arrest, and I didn't feel very comfortable with that.
Well, armed with a gun, there is no arrest. You just shoot them. There's no arrest. They just lay there on the ground until the ambulance shows up.
Yeah, but if you get into a scuffle and you injure somebody in a fist fight who's trying to, there's just a lot of scenarios where you're sticking your neck out with a citizen's arrest.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to kind of keep things, you don't really want to have a lot of commotion going on. Hey, guess what? We just got into a fight with the CIA, the director of Central Intelligence and his gang. So that wouldn't make for a good headline.
Well, did you ever have any experience like that?
No. I mean, that would be extremely rare. I don't think there's ever been a case of somebody trying to assassinate or assault a CIA director, but they, and I'm sure they've changed a lot in the CIA by now.
Who was DCI when you were on?
Oh, I'm trying to remember.
You didn't know there was going to be a cognitive test on this podcast either, did you?
It would have been whoever it was in 1982 to 85. I'm trying to remember. I think, Casey for a while I was in there,
But Casey was the one. I liked him. He passed away from the brain tumor, right?
Right. But he was a good guy. I had to stand in a hallway, when he was in a hotel room in San Francisco a few times. And I remember he was really down to earth. He thanked me for being out there. And I really liked Casey.
I have a name for you that you might, John LaPlume.
Yeah, I've heard him, but I never knew him. I never met him.
Or Alex Kirchner. But John at one point guarded Casey, I think when he was in the hospital. So anyway, just small world. Anyway, that was not a digression. That was part of the story. You don't get to drink for free on that one. But you were doing the security, but you also said that you ended up doing polygraphs. You said the polygraph was the toughest thing to pass. Tell us about the experience of going through a CIA polygraph. What's that like?
Well, let me digress slightly. I was the first 2 years of my CIA time were as a field agent doing background investigations, and I just a side detail guarding the director a couple times. And then I got lucky. I got transferred to become a polygraph examiner. I requested that because that was some really good training. And the polygraph, the thing to remember about polygraph is it's only as good as the examiner. The people don't realize a polygraph is just a tool. And what it does, it measures the blood flow. It measures, they have galvanic skin response to measure. They send a little electrical current through your hand, and minute differences in sweat are picked up because when someone's lying, they tend to sweat more. And the bottom line on polygraph is that it's only as good as the examiner. It's just a tool to help you see what's causing this guy stress, because it boils down to the old fight and flight syndrome. In the old days, even a caveman, he sees a saber-toothed tiger and he either runs or fights. and it changes your blood pressure, your adrenaline rate, and all these other physical factors. Well, our bodies, even though our minds are very different, our bodies haven't changed that much since the days we were cavemen. We still react to a threat, and it's the same way when somebody lies, unless they're, you know, a psychopath, a sociopath may not be picked up by the polygraph. We hope that if you go to a mental institution, a guy thinks he's Napoleon, you give him a polygraph, say, "Are you Napoleon?" He's going to pass the test, But if somebody has a conscience,
Yeah, that's why I say most people think that, they fail to realize that the polygraph, like you say, measures response to stress, to deception. But if you're a so how do you beat a polygraph? Especially like some of the serial killers and ones that they polygraph, they can pass it because they're true sociopaths. They feel no emotion. It does not affect them. And they believe it. They believe, like you say, I'm Jesus Christ, I'm Napoleon. So how'd you pass your polygraph?
Who did
well,
you think you were?
I guess even a blind hog finds corn once in a while. I was lucky I passed the polygraph. But there are 3 professions the polygraph is less reliable with. You want to guess what those are?
Prostitution, being from Kansas.
DEA agent,
Actually,
politician.
What are they?
actually, lawyers, salesmen, and undercover police officers, not uniformed police officers, but undercover police. Those 3 professions, I've found the polygraph's less reliable. And you know why that is? Because those 3 professions, they
they're
lie
trained to
almost
lie.
every day. Yeah. Almost every
Trained to
day
lie.
they lie about something. So
Some of them for profit, some of them because it's part of the job. Yeah.
yeah. So it's less reliable with those professions. But some people think that polygraph is not that reliable, and it's witch doctor stuff. But I tell you, over 90% of the people that I tested that reacted on the polygraph, I ended up with a confession. Think 90%, if they reacted, I got a confession. Now, if somebody, so it may be 10%, weren't guilty, but 90%, that's pretty reliable. I mean, that's the vast majority of people who get disapproved because of polygraph, and people don't lie about, if someone lied about something they did, you don't want to hire them anyway, so it is pretty reliable. But a lot of times, the reaction was not to the, well, let me give you an example. It can also be used to clear people. Okay, like I had a attractive little gal was applying to be a secretary at CIA headquarters. She was only, I think, 21 years old, and I asked her the question about crimes related to sex, and the needle was jumping all over. And I calmed her down and said, "Well, what are you thinking about when I ask you that question?" Well, it turned out it took me an hour of talking to her and calming her down. I found out she'd been raped about a year before the exam. And so I said, "Good, I'll change the question. Aside from what you told me, have you ever been involved in a sex crime?" And she got cleared, and we hired her. So it can also be used to clear people, and it's much more reliable with specific issues than a background.
Yeah, you can't generally say, and a lot of these are yes, no, right? So, it's because you don't want you can't have open-ended questions. You're measuring a response, and like you say, the more we did polygraphs a lot on homicides, obviously, but one interesting thing is I used to teach for John Reed and Associates. I was their first outside instructor, and one of the places I taught was out at the National Security Agency. So we had polygraphers from the agency there, Fort Meade, NSA, a lot of people doing what they call damage assessment. For the folks out there, damage assessment is what you have espionage or you have a leak. Now you polygraph people as part of damage assessment. But they did a study, just so people put this in context. They did a study and they found, guess what the most reliable indicator of deception is? It's not verbal, it's nonverbal. But when you combine verbal with nonverbal with the case facts and put it all together, a properly trained interviewer utilizing both verbal and nonverbal behavior, correctly armed with the case facts, can detect truthful or deceptive behavior 93% of the time. And that's what you get. You combine that with the polygraph, and that's what like you were saying. We're not talking about admitting it into court, but a polygraph becomes a tool to expose things that you then go back and interview them on. The polygraph is not the end of it. It's usually a lot of times right at the beginning of a conversation with somebody.
And it's also, as I was saying earlier, alluding to what you're referring to, much more accurate with a specific issue. For example, if someone is murdered with an ice pick, and the only people in the room are you and Steve, and so we know it's one of you two that did it. I ask you a question. I say, Steve, did you murder Sally with a gun? Did you kill her with a rope? Did you stab her with an ice pick? Did you kill her with a hammer? Well, only the murderer. That's why it's important police don't release the details of a crime to the general public, to media. So when you're polygraphing someone, you want to ask about something only the murderer or the perpetrator knew. So only the murderer would know that it was used an ice pick to kill the person. So I asked Steve, did you kill her with a gun? And no reaction. Did you kill her with a hammer? No reaction. Then I say ice pick, and the needle's jumping. Well, that's where it's good, because only the murderer would know to react to that type of question.
Hey, let me ask you too. So you hear stories, and I came on DEA when there was no polygraph required. Thank goodness. Not that I had anything to hide, but
Now's the time to cleanse your soul, Steve. Bring it forward. Let me get it all out.
Well, you hear a lot of people that do go through a polygraph, and they'll talk to you afterwards, and they're like, "That son of a bitch, he kept accusing me of something and trying to get me to admit something I didn't do, and then it was all over. I came back in, and they're like, you passed, like it's no big deal." Is that a tactic where you accuse people and try to get them to admit to something?
Well, we don't like.
That's not a denial. That's not a denial.
Well,
well, when you see stress to a certain type of question, you want to pressure them on it, and see what their as Morgan was talking about. You want to see what their body language is when you do that, because as you said, the body language is just as important as the things they state. But they're when I was talking about that confession rate being 90%, there may be people that can take a polygraph and beat it, but if they react, there's something there. Like the little gal I was telling you had been raped. There's something there that's causing stress to the parasympathetic nervous system. So you have to pressure them to get them to explain what it is that's on their mind. And that may take hours of interview. I mean, I never gave a polygraph exam that lasted less than 3 hours, and that's why, if you have a well-trained polygraph examiner, he works for CIA or FBI or DEA or Kansas Highway Patrol, I have no problem with taking one of those. But I would not feel comfortable taking a polygraph exam from some private detective that went through Uncle Willie's 6-week polygraph school, because there's a lot of polygraph examiners that you don't know their qualifications. And there's a lot of polygraph examiners. If you don't take a lot of time to get to know that person's personality and what's on their mind and what's causing them stress, if you aren't conscientious in that regard, then that hurts the reliability of the polygraph exam.
Well, let's talk about that.
You wouldn't go on the Maury Povich show and after, are you the really father of this child?
I went on Maury, told my story. Are you the baby daddy? Are you the baby daddy? Let's take a polygraph. Hey, let's rewind a little bit, because I asked you. See, you carefully and deceptively avoided talking about your polygraph interview and made it about somebody else's. Let's talk about how was your polygraph interview when you went through the agency. You said that was one of the toughest things you did. Give us a little bit more detail.
Well, because they get into every aspect of your life,
it's called a full scope lifestyle poly, right?
And they check for foreign. I mean, being from Kansas, I didn't have many foreign contacts. The FCI part was a piece of cake. But when you've been a police officer, there's a lot of stress. The things you've done.
I was going to say, you going to tell us one of these stories? What stressed you out besides the naked man?
Now, here's what happened, Murph. Okay. The polygrapher comes out and says, well, look, you did okay on some of this, but one of these questions we've got an issue on. Which question do you think it is?
Okay, I'm going to tell you guys a really bizarre story.
There we go.
Okay.
Is it worse than naked man hopping through your car on your first day out?
It is just about worse. Anyway, when I was growing up, and my dad was a podiatrist, but he loved cattle. He wasn't like most doctors. He wouldn't go golfing. He loved to raise cattle. And I had to go out and help him raise these registered polled Herefords in Abilene, Kansas, on my grandma's ranch. And anyway, my summer job was to go out there and help my dad. And my dad had these registered. He would order this semen from this champion bull down in Georgia, and we'd have to. And
This is
actually,
all going downhill. Oh, okay.
so anyway, I think that's why I got hired. My CIA interview, I told them this story, and they died laughing. They said, "Okay, you're hired." But anyway,
Nobody would make something like this up. Come on.
so anyway, I would go and we'd have to bring the bull in and get the vet, and the vet would put the semen into the bull. And the trouble is, it only worked half the time. So my dad and I, we go to K-State University to agriculture professors, and we said, what can we do to increase the percentages? Because this semen cost $500 a shot from this champion bull. In the 1960s, that was a lot of money. And they said, well, you need to get a Gomer bull, a marker bull. My dad and I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, it's this. What we do, we get some scrawny little Holstein bull, they're real horny little bulls, and we put a bottle of blue ink, like a Bic pen, under their neck, and you put that bull loose with your registered polled Hereford cows and heifers, and when they get in heat, he jumps on the back and marks blue ink on their back. And my dad and I said, well, that's kind of crazy, but then what's to keep him from impregnating these cows? I said, well, we do a surgery. We sew his penis so it's sticking out the back, and he can't mount and impregnate them.
Is this true?
And this is a true story. It's a true story.
It doesn't matter. It's a good story. Just go. Yeah.
So anyway, it works great. The success rate goes up 95% of the time now. I go out. My day job was to ride out in the field and see which cows had blue ink on their back and bring them in, call the vet, and we'd impregnate these cows. And it was making my dad a fortune because he's 95% reliable. And until one day, our neighbor, an old German neighbor, Hank Komen, had a feud with my dad. And he called my dad up and he said, Doc Hargreaves, we got a problem. And I said, well, what are you talking about? I'm listening on the extension phone. And he says, well, you've got some scrawny little Holstein bulls out there mounting your cows. And my dad, not thinking, he says, well, thank you, Hank, but what you don't understand is that's a marker bull, and he's had his penis sewn backwards so he can't impregnate them. And I hear this dead silence on the line. He says, then I hear, now I know you think I'm some stupid redneck, but do you think I'm going to believe some bullshit story about a bull with his penis sewn backwards? And he slams down the phone. I come out and he's cut all the fence on the ranch and everything. So that's the marker bull story. That's what I did in my summer when I was a teenager in Kansas.
So here's the question I got you. So you're in there with the CIA polygrapher. What question did they ask you to bring up the story about the bull semen from Georgia?
I'll tell you what, it's the lifestyle poly. Have you ever had sex with animals? And here we go.
Well, and that makes me wonder, should I be asking that about Morgan because he's from Kansas also? I mean, is that just a question you ask people from Kansas?
Well, I tell you what, when you're a polygraph examiner, you've heard everything. I mean, the guys in the clearance division used to laugh because I'd have the most bizarre confessions. One guy that was having sex with a horse, and we had another guy that was stealing from the collection plate. We'd asked him about theft, and he confessed every Sunday he'd steal the money out of the collection plate. I mean, you hear everything. Nothing surprises you.
What was he doing? Palming the bills as it comes across the front?
I guess he'd take the money out of the collection plate and pocket it and or half of it so it wouldn't be noticed. I don't know.
Oh my gosh!
On the police department, we finally convinced the chief. I said, "Look, we're all detectives. We're all trained in interview and interrogation. Let us interview the applicants before you send them on to the polygraph, because they would charge." We had a guy who he had a little bit more training than Joe Bob's 6-week course. But they would still polygraph people. Said, look, let us interview them before you send them onto it. And you know what? We probably saved the department, thousands of dollars because they just send people onto the polygraph and spend money on it. We said, so we would weed out people, and we had people show up. Had one guy working in the jail down in Albuquerque, New Mexico, end up talking to him, find out he's a peeping Tom. And people go, how do you get this? I said, to your point, you watch the body language, you realize you'll be polygraphed on this, but have you ever committed a crime that you were never caught for? What do you mean by crime? Well, what do you think, Skippy? You work in a jail,
Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
you mean the ones that statute of limitations hasn't run out on, or the ones that have?
yeah. But so how long were you in for your polygraph with the agency, and did you pass it the first time?
Yeah, I did. I was I think mine was only 3 hours, which sounds like a real long time, but it's about average, or 2 or 3 hours. But I was only in polygraph for a year, 1 year. Um, and what happened was, and the people in CIA are really good people. I really enjoyed working there, and this stuff you see about CIA, as your guest John was talking about, the FBI agent you were talking to the other day was saying, this stuff about the CIA dealing drugs. I think what the deal there, yeah, I mean, I find that hard to believe because, I mean, Levine might disagree with me, but I mean, we fired people who were using drugs. I mean, I had a lot of people who were heavy drug users who we wouldn't hire. I think what was going on there when you talk about, Colonel North and the Sandinistas and all that stuff, I think what it is when they were fighting a war against the communists, what people don't understand in the CIA, the media says a CIA agent did this. Well, a CIA agent is the same as a DEA informant. Okay.
Right.
Bingo.
And in the CIA, they don't call him an agent. You call him a case officer, except the guys in the Office of Security. We were special agents, but we're not out in the field that much. So what I think happened was we have all these mercenaries. You're not going to get choir boys to be mercenaries flying guns into Nicaragua, and they're flying these guns in, and these are pretty rough customers, and they're offering them.
These are guys looking to make a buck anywhere they can.
Exactly. And I don't think the CIA was authorizing them to fly drugs back. They were just doing this on their own. Just like Steve knows, we have informants go bad all the time. And I mean, I don't know. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of that, but that's my speculation of what was going on. Was they had a bunch of informants that went bad flying these planes in and said, well, hell, we can make a lot of money flying drugs back. We're flying guns in. We might as well fly drugs back.
And to your point, Guy, people don't understand the terminology. When you say agent, that is somebody who is a non-CIA employee, basically non-CIA. They're like they're an asset. They're committing. If you have an agent in place, they're actually, like say during the Cold War, you'd have an agent, a Russian agent. They were committing treason. They were spying against their country for the United States, for Team America. But that's where the confusion comes. People hear agent and they don't understand the distinction between intelligence or case officer and agent, and they think agent is a CIA person as opposed to an informant or an asset or somebody in the field.
Well, Morgan and I we were talking yesterday. We did some recordings for our Patreon subscribers, and we were discussing future topics. And one was to describe the difference between law enforcement, the intelligence community, and the Department of Defense or the military. So, I mean, that was a great explanation you just gave, and a great explanation of what potentially happened down in Central America. Whereas everybody, when Jaime and I, when we talk about the CIA, we had terrible experience with them in Colombia, but it was just the chief of station. I mean, the worker bees, the ones we were out in the field with, the guy that was up in Medellin with us. I think everybody's the name of the year that year was Paul, because everybody from CIA, their name was Paul, all the guys. So you never know whose name is what their real names are. But we give the CIA grief because of that chief of station. But the worker bees, we got along great with them. We have no problems. And I think the CIA is one hell of an organization. They catch a lot of grief from the media, but they can't defend themselves because the mission of their mission is secret. You can't come out and talk about shit like that.
Well, I think their biggest success, you've probably seen the movie Charlie Wilson's War. When they supplied Stinger missiles, that became Russia's Vietnam, and you have one guy hiding behind a rock with a Stinger missile, takes out a $10 million Soviet aircraft, and it changed the course of the war.
Those Hyde helicopters were going down like in flames, just all the time. And, but see, that's interesting. So, but you were there, like I said, you did the polygrapher stuff, but you're there 3 years. You said 3.5. What caused you to leave? What opportunity came up that said, "Hey, I'm going to leave being a spy, a double knot spy, and go do something else"?
Well, it's funny because my brother and my parents were the only ones who knew I was really working for the CIA. You have these covers like you're working for, the
What was your
Army.
cover story?
Well, I was an Army contractor. You can't tell anybody when you unless you're one of these engineers or something. If you're in the office of security or if you're a case agent, you can't tell anybody you work for the CIA. It's undercover. But uh, my brother and parents, the only ones knew. My brother said, "Why in the world are you going to leave CIA?" And I really enjoyed it. And it was good people, but I missed law enforcement. I missed arresting people, and you don't have the same gratification in my mindset, because you're living a secret life, and you can't talk about what you do, and it's very stressful if you're now. And the other thing about CIA, a lot of people don't understand is the case officers. It's not like James Bond. Your job is to seduce people into selling their country out. You go to a cocktail party at the embassy and you try and talk people into selling their country out. The only ones, the case officers don't carry guns. There is a section in CIA. Of course, this was a long time ago. Things may have all changed, but former military guys that carry guns, they go over to Afghanistan fighting terrorism stuff, training the foreign militaries. But it's not at all like you see in the television and movies.
I was just going to say, you get in law enforcement and you get bit by the bug, and we promote this on our Game of Crimes here, is that the vast majority of people that go into law enforcement are just wanting to help people. We're public servants, and that's what we all want to do. And then, we get one bad apple comes along, and the media just continually portrays that for the next 18 years, and that's what everybody thinks cops are. And that's a primary purpose we have Game of Crimes, is to show the true stories that go on inside of law enforcement. There's a shameless plug for our show.
Most of us, I think, we have some bad apples, but I think most of them just want to make the world a better place. But also, I have to admit, I had a little bit of mercenary. People wouldn't believe it when I told them, but DEA and FBI and Secret Service, federal law enforcement, gets 25% higher pay than the CIA because you have this availability pay. And
you don't get what they call the AUO, right? The administrative uncontrolled overtime.
And I had daughters that I wanted to send to college, and so money was important to me. As soon as I moved over, I had a 25% pay raise, plus the retirement program is better.
Now, were you on, because a lot of times too, there's another thing a lot of people don't know too, but like with some of the case officers, you're like on some of these folks are technically on contract. They're not technically employees as much as they're like on a 5-year contract or something, so there's been some it's one of those things. Is like people, when you go out and you're working, like say the non-official cover people, you're working somewhere and you're getting a salary, or even if you're working diplomatic cover, like say as of somebody with the secretary or the ag department, you only get to keep your CIA salary. You don't get to keep anything above that. So you might be in a $200,000 a year job, technically only making $60,000 a year. So you got to turn over $140,000 back to the government.
Yeah, actually, people don't. You're right. There's CIA has some companies that actually make a lot of money. And but there is also another group, a very specialized group called the NOCs, non-official cover, and these are the guys who are the very top case officers, and they come through and they have no affiliation with the government whatsoever. Because they're the real closest thing to James Bond. These guys, they get through the farm in Virginia, finish the training, and they go out into the world with no association, totally undercover.
No diplomatic cover, no lifeline.
Yeah, most case officers are assigned to the embassy in Moscow as a cultural attaché or some government
State Department or something.
State Department or U.S. Army, like I was, But the non-official cover, those guys, they are ghosts. They have no association. But that's
where do those paychecks come from?
I don't know. I don't know how they do that.
probably from one of the private companies that the CIA run.
Well,
And
Okay.
if I did know, I couldn't tell you because that's probably classified information.
True.
but what I can tell you, Murph, though, there are some places when you become a knock, when you're a knock and you're in certain companies, there are a couple people in the company that know.
Mhm.
And so it's tightly controlled. But yeah, but because you still have to, but guess what? They still got to do their day job and then go out at night and do their night job. It's not like you show up. It's not like one of the Gambino crime families, just show up jobs. It's just you show up and you don't have to do anything. They still have to do their day jobs and
Yeah.
then go out at night and do their regular work. But technically, that's what I've heard. That's what somebody told me one time. Back to you.
Okay.
Back to you, guy.
So anyway, it was a very rewarding experience, but very stressful. But the people I worked with at CIA, at least in the Office of Security, they were really good people and very admirable people. But as Steve mentioned, I just missed law enforcement. I missed being out there putting handcuffs on guys, and after 3 years, you kind of get tired of living a secret life. And also spending 8 hours a day interrogating people, them screaming at you and everything else and crying.
So was most of your work done out at Langley, or did you have to go different places to do this work?
Well, when I was a polygraph examiner, it was at CIA headquarters in Langley. Yeah. And before I was a polygraph examiner, I was in the San Francisco field office doing background investigations on, like scientists working for Lockheed or some of these other aircraft companies and so forth. Some guy, he's going to be a rocket scientist or work on some satellite or something for CIA. We do background investigations on them to give them a security clearance.
When I was still on the job with DEA, because DEA became part of the intelligence community, we would go to Langley for meetings on certain things. And it was like pulling teeth to get in the property, and you had to have these appointments made, and you had to send your security clearances over. I mean, it was a pain in the butt to go over there. Be quite honest. And it was the same at NSA up at Fort Meade. Then after I retire, I got bored, so I started doing background investigations for not state OPM. So most of the ones I was doing, because I still had my clearances from the government, was renewal background investigations for mostly CIA contractors. But a lot of those were retired CEA personnel. And I would call a secretary and I'd say, hey, I need to come in and do your background. And she'd say, okay, I'll get you on the list. And I'd pull up and I'd show them my little OPM ID card. Hey, come on in. Have a good time. Where before, when I was actual government employee, I was almost getting orifice searches to come in on the property,
and have
then
to
I could
pass
get
your
in.
clearances over and go through
I
all
could
of that
walk.
rigmarole.
I could get in Langley, and there were certain places I could just walk around the building. I mean, there's certain places you couldn't. You knew where not to go. But I thought, holy cow, what's wrong with this picture?
When they created DEA, when they created DEA, a lot of people don't know they actually went over to CIA and offered. A lot of CIA agents came over to DEA when they created it, especially for the foreign posts, because they had these guys already overseas, and they offered them a grade raise to come over to DEA. And in the beginning, not now, but when they originally created DEA, it's my understanding, that's way before I was, in DEA, but it's my understanding they hired quite a few CIA agents to become DEA agents because of, especially for the overseas posts of duty.
Yeah, I think. Did you know Joe Keefe?
Yeah.
I
Joe
believe he
Keefe.
was one of the guys that came over from CIA. He's a legend. He's a legend. Just an unbelievable man.
All right, so let's talk about. So once you made that decision, was DEA your next stop then after CIA?
Yeah, because DEA, in my opinion, DEA, you get more action than any other federal law enforcement agency, especially in, with this drug war going on. And so it was just very attractive to me. And also, I saw drugs as being a greater threat than the communists were at that point in time.
So what year did you get on DEA?
Yeah.
I got hired by DEA in 1985. And I was like only the first or second class to go through the FBI. They had just moved the basic training for DEA agents from Glencoe, Georgia to the FBI Academy. And I was only the second class of I think of BA 42, Basic Agents Class 42, to go through. They had joined the FBI training with we had the same firearms ranges and as the FBI, although I think it's no secret DEA and FBI kind of squabble like the Marines and the Navy. Up there in the boardroom there were some near fistfights, but it was an interesting experience.
The boardroom, that's code for bar.
Yeah,
the bar. All right, so as we asked with everybody who's gone through the DEA Academy, let's talk about, were you ever sanctioned and had to write a memo as a result of that during your training?
I was lucky. I never did get disciplined for anything that I can remember.
I can remember. Oh, let's dive on this question.
I have no recollection, Your Honor.
You can't tell me or you won't tell me. There's a difference.
I can't confirm or deny.
Oh, but you didn't have to write any memos?
Not that I
recall.
Yeah. Well, if you did, they must not.
Not that I was that well behaved of a trainee, but I guess I was lucky.
Well, you learned you learned your tradecraft from CIA, and you just learned how to get away with it and pin the blame on somebody else.
Stay out of trouble. Yeah,
how to cover up.
Yeah. So when you went through your training, how was your process? Because everybody's things change over the years. So how was your process of picking your first post of duty? Did you get to submit your wish list, or did they assign it to you? And what did you pick, and where did you end up going?
Well, I picked Virginia Beach because that's because I was already in Virginia.
Of course.
And I thought, well, that sounds pretty good. Of course, I didn't get it. Hardly anybody gets their pick, as you're probably well aware. And they sent me to Omaha, Nebraska. And
well, that's close. That's
who did you get?
Omaha. Well, this is the funny thing about it is actually I didn't mind because my parents were in Kansas, and it was only a 2.5 hour drive to Junction City from Omaha, and also the other, all these guys like Steve, the big city guys, they say, oh my God, you're going out there in the middle of nowhere. I said, hell, in Omaha, Nebraska, a GS-13 is making about the same salary as the attorney general for the state of Nebraska, whereas in New York City, you only get paid 15% more for being stationed in New York City, and you're making about the same as a sergeant in the New York City Police Department.
And you're on food stamps, and and the traffic sucks.
I really didn't mind being sent to Omaha because the cost of living was dirt cheap. I mean, I could buy a mansion in Omaha for what you'd pay for a 1-bedroom condo in California or New York, and with 3 daughters, that was an important thing to keep in mind.
So, which job were you on when you got married?
Oh God, I got married right. That's when I was an editorial clerk at FBI. So that I got married
your
way
wife?
back. Yeah,
you meet her at FBI headquarters?
No, I met her at the University of Kansas. We were both in journalism school at the University of Kansas, and I was married to her for 25 years. Had 3 daughters, and unfortunately, we broke up a few years ago, 14 years ago. And I met a wonderful woman, Veronica Polidori, and I've been married to her since 2008. And I've gained a lot of weight because she's a fantastic Italian cook.
Oh, yeah. And I bet you don't give her any shit, though, do you?
Oh, no, you ain't kidding. She's tough as nails. And we lived on a ranch in Arizona that she owned. We lived there for years, kind of ties in with the marker bowl, I guess. And
I don't know what your job was on the ranch. Yeah.
And we lived there. It was wonderful. We had, it was kind of like a desert oasis. We had catfish pond and a bass pond and all kinds of wildlife out there. And the only bad thing was there were a lot of rattlesnakes. Oh my God, I had to shoot a rattlesnake about every 4 weeks. And one of my husky dogs got bit in the nose by one of the rats. But anyway, to make a long story short, we just sold the ranch a couple months ago because Veronica wanted to be with her daughter in Arkansas. So now we're in Arkansas. We're moving here and buying a new house here and right in the process of resettling because you have those grandkids, you miss them.
That's why I'm in Orlando, brother.
Yeah, and then you move down there and they move away from you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's me or my wife. It must be my wife. It couldn't be me, right?
Yeah, look around the room. Yeah, see who the problem. Hey, but you go to Omaha. So what? Because this is interesting too because a lot of people think just the Midwest, just flyover country. But I know from my time on the police department working with the DEA task force, we had guys, there was a lot of shit moving through the Midwest. Everything from cocaine to marijuana to meth. There were big transshipment points. 81 was the only unbroken north south US highway in the United States. It would go from the Mexican border to the Canadian border, US 54 Operation Pipeline. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening in the Midwest, planes landing on old Army airfields. So when you went up to Omaha, what were you getting involved in? What were you working?
Well, it was interesting because when I first came to Omaha, uh, it was like being stationed with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police because I was the only. There were only two of us for the entire state of Nebraska. You know, and, in Miami they might have what
What?
four. Yeah, when they transferred me to Omaha, we only had two DEA agents to cover the entire state of Nebraska. They would have
No
what four or
kidding.
500 in Miami alone. So it
Yeah,
was
we had a
good, and it
couple of
was
hundred. Yeah.
it was being a new agent. It was kind of good because it gave me a lot of responsibility. I didn't have to listen on wiretaps and do mundane jobs for the senior agents. But it was. There were, as you said, we had a case where they had a big semi truck that was filled with cocaine, and the Nebraska Highway Patrol intercepted it, and the Air Force helped us out. They had one of those huge Air Force
Starlifters, I think.
yeah, Starlifter, and they drove the semi into the Starlifter because Nebraska State Patrol and DEA had interrogated this guy for a couple of days, so it was behind schedule. So they flew this semi to New York City, and so that it would get there in time so they could do the bust. So there were some really really interesting. But the funny thing is when people think of Nebraska and they think of Kansas, uh, the ironic thing is the biggest LSD lab and the biggest fentanyl lab ever seized in DEA history were seized in Kansas. So these little rural areas sometimes have a lot more going on than people realize.
Explains a lot about Morgan. You just put a whole new light on this guy.
Hey, look, I actually could truthfully say on my background when I got polygraphed doing some work later out here in Virginia, I was polygraphed. Have you ever used drugs? I said, well, let's be clear because you know how it is with polygrapher. Here, I want to help you craft the question correctly so you can ask me. You will find I have used cocaine. And they go, what do you mean by used? I said, well, I broke my nose during the Highway Patrol Academy. I mean, my nose was like literally moved underneath my left eye. I took an elbow to the nose. So to cauterize the blood, what do they use? They use hospital grade cocaine, a
Oh
blue
yeah.
solution that swabs on there. So I said, if you ask me, yes, you will find, but it's not in there illegally, it's in there legally. So anyway, my one drug story. There you go. Everybody's fascinated by that. There we go. Digression. Drinking game number 3. Oh yeah, go back to sleep, Murph. Hey, well, but yeah, so we're going to get into that, especially the LSD one. But what other cases? So, what was it like being two guys for the entire state? I mean, you had to be going then all the time.
Oh yeah, well, to drive from one side of Nebraska to the other to meet with the sheriff, it was you were
8 hours.
yeah, you were pretty isolated out there, So I had a lot of great liaison with a lot of, especially the Nebraska State Patrol were great working with DEA. Out there, and it had a lot of great liaison. And then after I was there for a few years, uh, we did get more agents in there, and the resident agent in charge of the Omaha office, he said, "Guy, we'd like you to volunteer for Operation Snowcap." And I said, "Operation Snowcap?" Well, and he explained to me what that was all about. I guess they wanted to get guys with previous military experience or CIA experience, like I had, to go down to raid these cocaine labs in South America, and I volunteered for that. I did a couple tours with Snowcap, so my wife and family could stay in Omaha while I was doing this crazy stuff. And but actually, it's this month in August. like to do a dedication to Frankie Fernandez and his Operation Snowcap team that passed away in August of 1994. They were flying in a small twin-engine Casa aircraft and flew into a box canyon, and all five of them perished. Um, they were, I think that's the biggest loss of life DEA has ever had in one thing. I mean, we've had a lot of agents killed in shootouts and so forth, but 5 agents at one time was a real catastrophe. And I think about that every August because Frankie asked me to join him on that tour of duty. And but for the grace of God, I told him, I said, Frank, I've already done 2 tours, and I think this is like rolling craps in Vegas. Sooner or later, we
Your
might
number
get
gets
trouble.
called. Yeah.
Yeah, Meredith Thompson was on that flight. I was stationed down in Miami. She was one of our friends down there. That was horrible. There was actually one incident where more lives were lost, and that's when the DEA Miami office, the garage caved in onto the building, the parking garage. But it was mostly support personnel. And so I think you're right that, 5 agents being killed in that aircraft is the greatest loss of life we've ever experienced in DEA at one time.
As far as agents, yeah.
But yeah, and so can you just tell us a little bit about Snowcap, what countries you went to, what the training you had to go through? I mean, that's not something just you come out of the academy and go straight into Snowcap.
Yeah, they were really good. I was impressed. As you know, Frank White is a real character. He kind of ran the Snowcap. He's been in more shootouts than any agent in DEA history, I think. And he's former military guy, and I think he was in Vietnam, won the Bronze Star. And he was kind of our mentor. And he made sure we went through some really good training. They sent us through the U.S. Army Jungle Warfare School in Panama, and they sent us through um, Spanish language training in Glencoe, Georgia. And also, we went through some demolitions training to blow up these labs, demolitions training with the Marine Corps in Quantico. And I was part of this group called the Riverine Group. I never could figure out why they picked me. Being from Kansas, they picked me for the Riverine Group. But they said, "Well, we saw you were a scuba diver, so we thought at least we knew you know how to swim." And they sent the Riverine Group also to the U.S. Navy SEALs training base at Coronado Island, and that was great because as I said, when I was growing up, I wanted to be I was thinking about being a military officer, and here I got to go through all these military schools as a civilian, so I didn't get harassed. I looked out the window while we're learning how to use the M60 machine gun, and all these poor Navy SEALs out there doing push-ups and sit-ups, and we get all this great training how to run Zodiac boats and didn't have to get harassed. But kind of funny sidelight, the Navy SEALs, they called us the manatees because he said, "You guys may not be SEALs." We were all like over 30 and some of us overweight, and he said, "You guys know how to shoot, but you can't swim worth a damn. And we're going to call you the manatees." So I thought that was kind of, we were thinking about making a patch for the Snowcap Riverine Group being a manatee,
But that's funny. I've never heard that.
So we, so anyway, it was great. Snowcap was an amazing experience. For people don't understand. I don't think we could have done Snowcap in Colombia where Steve was. My God, we'd had body bags coming back because you had the FARC and I mean, and the Bolivians weren't really that aggressive. I mean, once in a blue moon, usually how it would work, we'd have some peasant come out of the jungle and, we'd give him, say, "We'll give you $500. Tell us where a cocaine lab is." Well, $500 to a guy in the jungles of Bolivia would be like 50,000 to you or I. And we'd put a mask on them, a hood, and they'd get in a helicopter and we'd fly out there with the team and we'd raid these cocaine labs. 9 times out of 10, they would just run in the jungle and hide. Once in a while, they might come out and pop a few rounds as we're flying away. But it wasn't like Colombia where, it was open warfare. In Colombia, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard there were years in Colombia where he had 600 police officers killed in a single year. My God, in the United States, we have 5 times their population, and we might have 100 and some killed. And it was a whole different story in Colombia.
It was, and between the FARC and M19 and ELN, the different revolutionary groups that were operating down there, and then you throw in the narcos on top of it. It really was the Wild West. But now, did you go to Bolivia or Peru, or did you go to both?
No, I was just in Bolivia. My tours of duty were in Bolivia. Um, no, I did. There were when I got into international training, I was also training the police in Colombia. Uh, international training, that was the best job I ever had in my life. My God, you fly around the world and you spend 2 weeks training police, and they treat you like a king. And all. I mean, uh, I did a school in Lagos, Nigeria, and my God, you see two dead people on the side of the road just between the airport and the embassy, and I'm thinking, boy, drugs are about the last of your problems, and there's so much poverty, and then the next school's in Qatar, where they have so much money that the head of the narcotics unit comes out in a Range Rover, and he's in a sheik's outfit with a falcon on his shoulder, taking me to the camel races. And you see the real differences in the world. I mean, regular police officer in Qatar have a brand new Mercedes Benz with blue lights on it. Americans don't realize the difference. In countries around the world as far as wealth and law enforcement.
And you go to some of those countries, and man, it really makes you appreciate where you live here in the U.S., doesn't it?
Oh yes, incredibly.
As nice as Colombia was, I was offered back when Michelle Linhart was administrator. She asked me if I'd be interested in being the regional director for DEA in Colombia, and I told her what as much as I love Colombia, what it did for me is make me appreciate living in the United States.
Yeah, you go to some of these armpits of the world. I tell you, probably one of the worst places I went to, just from a humanity standpoint, was Islamabad. And just looking at, the way people were treated. I mean, there were some areas in India too that were bad, but man, you're right. You get back on that plane, you land on U.S. soil, and you just want to get down and kiss the ground and go, man,
Thank you, God.
or do the Dorothy and Wizard of Oz. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. Click your heels 3 times. So, hey, but how long were you doing snowcap? How many years did that take you?
Well, I only did 2 tours of duty. Their tours are 3 months each, and I was in snowcap for like 3 years, I think. And the most dangerous. Well, we did have a few shootouts in snowcap. Hope got in a shot in the foot, and we had a few guys, but uh, the, uh, the dangerous thing in Bolivia was the environment, the bugs and the snakes and the jaguars, and we had a lot of agents got parasites. There's all kinds of insects. The environment was more dangerous than the traffickers almost. I mean, we had a lot of guys got sick from different parasites. I had a group supervisor. Robert Fredericks. He was stationed in Ecuador, and he was walking down the street years later in I think Connecticut, and went into a grand mal seizure. And they took him. They thought it was a brain tumor. They got ready to do a surgery, but fortunately, they had a doctor who was tropical disease specialist. Said, "Let me do some more tests," and they found out he had a neurocysticercosis. There's a certain type of pork. If you eat it, this bug gets in your system, and these eggs go up in your brain, and then they can hatch later and throw you into.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, it's like a movie Alien. Well, another.
Alien.
Yeah,
Oh,
like the movie Aliens, And well, as a matter of fact, when I was down in the jungle down there, I one night it was so hot and humid. I had we'd hang up a hammock between a couple trees to sleep in so the bugs wouldn't get you. And I took the mosquito net off me because it was so damn hot. And this special forces sergeant who was with us, he said, "Hargreaves, you don't want to do that." And I said, "What are you talking?" I said, "Next day he took me to the special forces clinic down there in the jungle, because the special forces were training the Bolivian police, but they couldn't go out in the raids because of the Mansfield and Boland amendments. So they took DEA agents who used to have military experience to go out in the raids with the Bolivian police. But anyway, he showed me this Bolivian. He had a huge lump on his cheek, and they cut it open, and tweezers pulling and pulling. It was like a 6-inch worm they pulled out of his cheek. And I said, "What is that?" They said, "That's why you don't want to sweep without the mosquito net. There's a thing they call the pachichi bug here. While you're asleep, like a mosquito, it'll inject eggs under your skin, and it grows into these things. If you don't treat it, and crawl in and eat your eyeball out. So,
Oh,
aside from the traffickers, you had, the poisonous snakes and all the insects that were
Note to self:
a
take
real threat.
Bolivia off my vacation list. Jeez.
But it makes you want to jump on a plane and head down there, doesn't it?
Hey,
Well,
let's
but there are spots in Bolivia that are wonderful. That's the deep jungle, the triple canopy jungle, that we're talking about there.
these labs you're talking about, were they actually where they made the process the cocaine, or was that the paste, or what was the purpose of the labs in Bolivia? What stage of the production were they involved?
Most of the labs in Bolivia were paste. Well, first you have the pozo pits that make paste, and then they have the base labs where they turn it into cocaine base, and then usually they take kilos of base and send it up to Colombia, where it's turned into the final product, cocaine hydrochloride, which is kind of ironic in a way. John, in your other interview, was talking about crack cocaine. Well, that's cocaine base because because base cocaine, it burns at a lower temperature. You can smoke it. You can't smoke cocaine hydrochloride. So rather than turn it into crack, I don't know why they don't just send kilos of base cocaine up. But anyway, they turn it into the
Don't give
cocaine.
him any ideas, guy. Don't give him any ideas.
Well, they figured that out up here
Yeah.
in the United States already.
Well, speaking of ideas, uh, when I was later in international training, they sent me to Mexico with a team of guys from training office to train the Mexican federal police, and Procuraduría General de la República. They had this new group. And I was saying, well, my God, the corruption down there in Mexico, you're going to have us train these guys, And they said, no, the Attorney General of Mexico met with Janet Reno and said we should train the Mexican federal police because what they need is training. I said, okay, I'm a good soldier. I'll do whatever you order me to do. So I go down there the first day of training. We have 140, 120 seats out in the audience there with books, like $200 worth of books at each seat. The first day of the school, only half of them even show up. Now, can you imagine DEA Academy or Kansas Highway Patrol? Half of your class doesn't even show up the first day of the academy.
Oh, no.
You know,
Or you wouldn't come back second day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so then I look at you haven't heard the good part. So then I look up, and by about 11 o'clock in the morning, all the books are gone, except for one or two. They're stealing each other's books. And then one of the instructors comes into me and says, "Guy, you're not going to believe this. They stole my book off the lectern in front of the classroom." So I called back to Quantico. I said, "Are we out of our minds?" I said, "These guys are stealing each other's books. You think they aren't going to take a $50,000 bribe from a drug lord?" So anyway, that was some good work of Janet Reno. And but the reason I'm telling you this story is because during the course of this training, when I started talking about methamphetamine, meth hadn't kicked off yet. It was just the biker gangs that were doing meth then. And I started talking about methamphetamine and how you could use $5,000 worth of chemicals and make $50,000 worth of methamphetamine in a trailer house outside of Kansas City. And you wouldn't need to pay thousands of peasants to pick coca leaves or smuggling bribes or airplanes or customs smuggling. And they came to attention. They were really interested then. And it was only about a year later that the cartel got into methamphetamine. They started putting meth in with their cocaine shipments, and it took off like a new brand of Viagra, and it was cheaper to make. And I almost wonder if we didn't give them the idea.
Yeah,
sad commentary
like
that is.
Oh, man.
But I was just following orders to train them,
Well, so, I mean, eventually what we're talking about, I mean, you're like all over the world. Let's start zeroing in now and start talking about, and actually you have two books out. I was negligent in looking at the second one, but you've got two books out. The one's called Operation Trip to Oz, which is the one we're going to talk about. The second one is called 21 Deadly Mistakes, which I'm glad you wrote, because that's the type of book every cop needs to read. Everybody who carries a firearm in the profession of arms needs to read, and take a look at this. So you've got a couple books out, but so we start talking about this Operation Trip to Oz. But as you come full circle, do you go back out to the Midwest again? Where is your duty station at when you start working this LSD case?
What happened was how the case started. I was Well, I used to be the supervisor for the DEA clandestine laboratory safety school, and we could do a whole other presentation on that about how cops are trained to how to handle violent suspects, but they aren't trained to be firefighters or chemists or bomb disposal. And when you raid these cocaine or when you raid these meth labs, you know. You can have threats in all those arenas. I mean, you're wrestling some Hell's Angel into a set of handcuffs, and you knock a bottle of hydrochloric acid into a bottle of cyanide, and you've just turned it into a cyanide gas chamber. So we had this school at Quantico at Camp Upshur that I ran with another agent to train DEA agents and police the specific threats related to clandestine drug labs. Well, when I was running the school, there were only two of us there. And all of a sudden, meth labs exploded all across the country. We were running around like cats in a room full of rocking chairs trying to train police on all these new threats. Well, anyway, I was there for a few years, and then I was lucky. I got promoted to be a supervisor, and they brought me up to DEA headquarters, where I was the coordinator for the DEA Operation Velocity, staff coordinator for Operation, which was a nationwide program to provide equipment and support to all these clandestine lab raid teams across the country. So we buy lab trucks and self-contained breathing apparatus and all these ninja suits for them, which were fire resistant. So when they raid these labs, they would have a little more safety. And it was while I was there, my boss came in and said, "Guy, we just got a guy showed up at Main Justice with his lawyer from Kansas, and he wants to turn in what he says is the biggest LSD trafficker in the world. And we want you to interview him because we know you know about clandestine drug labs." And I was getting ready to go interview him, and it turned out this was Gordon Todd Skinner, one of the main characters in this book I wrote. And I was getting ready to interview him, but I thought, I have my partner here is Zach Zajac, who was a DEA chemist before he was
Did you say Pat Sajak, like in Wheel of Fortune? What'd you say?
Zach. They called him Zach, Z-A-C-K, Zach Zajac. And he was a DEA chemist before he became a DEA agent. And he was also a colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. And I thought, well, he'd really be a better guy to interview, this Todd Skinner, because he's a chemist. Because meth labs, I'm totally comfortable with. I mean, I could train Forrest Gump how to make methamphetamine. It's pretty simple. But LSD labs, they are extremely complicated. I mean, DEA chemists tell me at that time, there were probably only a dozen black market chemists in the entire world who knew how to produce LSD. So I thought, well, Zach, would you interview this guy? Because you could probably do a better job than I would. And he did. And he came back and he was, he was really impressed. He said, "Guy, you aren't going to believe this case. This guy says this William Picard, who Todd Skinner's affiliated with, is producing millions of doses of LSD at this decommissioned nuclear missile silo in Wamego, Kansas, of all places," which, as you said, was really rare because, I mean, like you, when I was a kid, I used to drive through Wamego and you'd see these. I said, what a coincidence this is, and that it would be, 10 miles from my hometown that has the biggest LSD lab in history. So anyway, Zach kicked this off. Originally, he started it out of DEA headquarters, and then it was transferred to two great agents. Roger Hanslick was the case agent in Kansas, and then they had another agent who handled the California side of the investigation, Carl Nichols out of California. And Carl, I think he used to be a chemist before he was an agent too, so that was a good fit. And they ended up making this. And I wrote a book about this. I was reading all the DEA sixes, what was going on. And I was fascinated because this William Picard was trying to say that he was a CIA undercover agent. He was really doing this for the CIA. Well, I knew that was bullshit from my background. And it turned into, I know Steve, Steve had a fantastic case. We didn't have the dramatic shootouts and international stuff with Pablo Escobar, but we certainly had the most bizarre characters of any DEA case that I can.
Let's lay out some of the groundwork.
I read the book.
For this.
You're exactly right.
So let's start laying out the groundwork for this. So How did you end up getting involved? So what's your now that I mean you've got a group of folks obviously working. So what's your role in the investigation now? What are you doing?
Well, then what happened was, as I said, there were two other agents that were the case agents, and this really wasn't my case. But I transferred back to Kansas City and became the director of the Midwest HIDA Investigative Support Unit in Kansas City, and that was more of an intelligence group. Deconflicting cases, and so we didn't have the highway patrol busting DEA in some undercover operation, or and so I was really in the background on this. I wasn't out in the field on this, but I had a support role as providing intelligence to the unit. And the more that I found out such fascinating stuff, I decided I needed to keep notes on this, and later wrote a book about it. But what it boiled down to was, it's the story of a brilliant Harvard chemist who tried to bring back the 1960s era of free love to the
Timothy Leary,
21st century.
tune
Yeah,
in. What
turn
was it?
on.
Tune in. Yeah, tune in, turn on, and drop out.
Yeah, yeah, and this guy, you have to understand, the unlike the unlike the traditional drug lords like Steve worked on in Colombia, or the violent Hell's Angels motorcycle gangs, or the traditional mafia. Uh, William Leonard Picard was a real anomaly. I mean, this guy was a Buddhist monk. He had a master's degree from Harvard. He had a cover as a drug policy analyst for University of California, UCLA, and he would fly around the world doing drug policy conferences. He even did one at Queen Elizabeth's Windsor Castle. And
Wait,
then he
wait,
then
wait,
he
wait, wait, wait. He's flying around doing drug policy conferences while he's actively working with this other guy making LSD.
Yeah, he's the biggest LSD trafficker in the history of the world, and he has this perfect cover as a drug policy analyst for UCLA. And then he would fly to Russia, and he would do studies with working with the KGB, or the FSB now, I guess, and studying fentanyl. And then he flies, he marries the daughter of some KGB agent, and then he flies to Afghanistan, and he's studying. He tries to work out a deal. Well, in one of his busts, he's busted twice for drug labs before this case. And in one of his busts, he did some prison time, and his cellmate was Colonel Akbar, who from Afghanistan. And Colonel Akbar's uncle was like the Secretary of Defense or something in Afghanistan. And Picard flew over there to talk to the Afghans, and they tried to arrange a deal to trade 600 kilos of heroin and 6 Stinger missiles, to turn them into the U.S. if they would get Colonel Akbar a reduction in his prison sentence. But he was doing this on his own. He was like a self-appointed international spy, and he really wasn't working with the U.S. government. And then he goes to customs and he tries to work out this deal, and they say no, because what he was really going to do was just, they were going to give some peasant, his family, $100,000, and he would bring this stuff over, and he'd spend the rest of his life in jail, and he had nothing to do with it. It was a scam to get a reduction in the sentence for Colonel Akbar. But he
Hey, hold
tried
on a
to.
second. This guy's been busted twice already. Does nobody do a background at the University of California at Los Angeles before they put somebody into a drug policy program to see, have you got any arrests that might involve drugs?
Oh, not only, I mean, this guy, I looked at his background. See, he has this, he tries to put on this persona that he's a spiritual leader. People who use the LSD, they call them entheogens. It's entheogen meaning to be in the presence of God. To them, using LSD isn't drug abuse. It is a spiritual enlightenment experience to bring you to a higher level of enlightenment. And he has this cult group of entheogen users who thinks he's like a guru. And this guy, but he's a phony, because he's a career criminal. He's been arrested 12 times. We found out everything from forgery to passport fraud to drug labs, and he's a con man. And he even had an arrest for carrying a concealed weapon, you know, And his supporters try to say that this was draconian for the government to put him away because he's just a spiritual Buddhist monk who's trying to save the world with LSD. Well, how many Buddhist monks have been arrested for carrying a concealed weapon? And have
Well,
yeah,
It's kind
to
of
your
hard to
point,
put a weapon in some of those robes that those monks use. You really got to. I don't want to know where they conceal it.
Morgan, UCLA considers that experience.
Oh, yeah. Who better to talk about drug control policy than somebody who tried to set up a poor Afghan farmer with 6 kilos of heroin or 6 Stinger missiles and 100 kilos of heroin, and get a obviously somebody doing time released. Yeah, well, perfect. Pro tip: if you're a felon out there listening to this podcast and you're wondering where your career path takes you, sounds like
UCLA.
UCLA is the place for you to go.
Anyway, this guy, he was such an anomaly for a DEA drug lord. I mean, most DEA cases, they have these flamboyant crack dealers or drug lords like Steve worked on. This guy was a marathon running vegetarian. He
Forrest
was
Gump. Oh, geez.
he was endowed with a phenomenal chemical knowledge faculty, and he was very intelligent and polite. He's tall and thin. He some ways he doesn't smoke. He doesn't drink alcohol or eat meat. He meditates and practices yoga. And he previously lived at the San Francisco Zen Center on Page Street. He's really not your typical profile of a drug lord for DEA.
I eat healthy. I work out. I meditate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
he's still a douchebag.
but he came from a very well-to-do family. His father was a lawyer, and his mother was a fungal disease expert at the Center for Disease Control. And in high school, he was named as the most intellectual. He got a scholarship to Princeton, but dropped out after only one term. He preferred to hang out at the Greenwich Village jazz clubs. And he later, obtained a degree in chemistry, and then he got a master's degree from Harvard. But he had a very optimistic future. This guy was brilliant. But instead of using all this, for good, he a criminal strain evidently ran in his blood, which instead of being modified was increased and rendered infinitely more dangerous by his extraordinary mental prowess. He had international contacts which ranged from aristocrats in England to organized crime figures in Russia and drug lords in Afghanistan. He was truly a man of mystery and intrigue.
Regular Austin Powers. Oh, great.
It's funny you would say that, because it really was an Austin Powers group of characters.
Kind of comedic type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what his undercover name was? He used James Maxwell as his undercover name. We took James from James Bond and Maxwell from Maxwell
Smart. Get smart. Oh, dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
So this, I mean, so do you have or did you find out, when did this guy's criminal path start? Was it while he was in college, after he was in college? When did he start down this road of all these arrests?
His whole life. I mean, he was stealing cars, and when he was, forgery. I tell you what happened was he spent I don't think he ever worked a day in his life except for this drug policy stuff. He was a trust fund kid. And other than his work, but he was extremely intelligent. He did a lot of research that was very valuable. And, I have to hand it to him in one thing. One thing he was really right about, and I credit him, is he pointed out that the future danger for this country was fentanyl. And he was absolutely right about that. And he even interviewed, I told you earlier about how the biggest fentanyl lab in law enforcement history was in Wichita, Kansas. And he went and interviewed the guy who ran in prison that ran that fentanyl lab, and they exchanged notes as chemists. But he never produced fentanyl. He I have to give him credit. He thought fentanyl was terrible, but he thought LSD and hallucinogens were great. So I guess in a context, he wanted to turn the world on with LSD. We'd been better off being on hallucinogens than fentanyl, but I don't think either one of them is very good for you.
Hey, now
Right.
was that fentanyl bust? I think that is outside Wichita. Was that a little town called Goddard, Kansas?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. Yeah, that was like nobody really understood back then the importance of that arrest, I don't think, because that was like it's not like we talk about now. Fentanyl's such a big issue right now. We're talking about it coming over the border. I don't think anybody understood back then. God, again, I'm gonna have to rethink. Yeah, I'm from Kansas, but not the areas where they did. Not from Wamego and not from Goddard. So just got to add
No,
that to my resume.
hey, you're from Kansas. You own the whole state. You got to go with what they got.
All right. So as you start working there, I mean, you're kind of in the catbird seat. I mean, you can see a lot of this stuff coming across. What's starting to happen in this case now? So from the time the guy walks in, by the way, let's kind of book in this. What was this guy's initial reasoning? The guy that walked into Main Justice. Why did he decide to? Hey, I wanna talk.
Well, that's the Picard. I call him the wizard because he even looked like a wizard. He had long white hair, and this case was actually named Operation White Rabbit, but I changed it to Operation Trip to Oz for the book because the Wizard of Oz Museum was in Wamego, Kansas, and it was kind of like taking a trip, LSD, and it was in this decommissioned nuclear missile silo. And anyway, there was this guy. His name was Gordon Todd Skinner, and he was also a trust fund kid. His family were very wealthy, and they were next door here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. His mother, Kathleen McGreeny, was a socialite in Tulsa, and they owned this big spring. They owned this Gardner Spring Company, which produced industrial springs, had income of 5 to 10 million a year in some years. And anyway, this Gordon Todd Skinner, he was also a chemist like William Picard. My personal opinion, I don't think he was as brilliant of a chemist as Picard, but they had a lot in common. They would go to these entheogen conferences to talk about hallucinogens. And he goes up and he buys this, talks his mom into buying this missile silo in Wamego as a place to produce these springs for the Gardner Spring Company. When in reality, it was just a cover. Okay. They Yeah, well, actually, I think they did bring some equipment up there. But what he did is he turned this missile silo into his entheogen sacramental palace. Okay, where he spent over $100,000, put in Italian marble floors. He and the missile base already had security, high security, 12-inch thick doors and everything. And he put a movie theater into it. He fixed it up with a hot tub and a theater with pornographic stuff, and he turned it into an underground palace for drug and sex parties. And he would drive women in out of Kansas City, and they'd have these big parties in there and everything. And then I guess one of these women got busted for DUI, and he was concerned that the local police would catch on. So he was such a con man. He was so smart in a way. He hired the local police in Wamego to do security, perimeter security on his missile silo, telling them that he was producing springs for the NASA space shuttle. And anyway, to make a long story short, one of these guys in this party had an overdose and died. And instead of running him to the local hospital, they drove him all the way to Manhattan. And so he didn't make it. So he was under suspicion for drugs with that. And then also, what he did that was really stupid was he was laundering all this money with Picard that they were making from selling the LSD in Holland. And he would go to the Native American casino outside of Topeka, and he would gamble tens of thousands of dollars. And he went to cash his chips in, and he showed his dead stepfather's IRS special agent badge, said he was a federal agent. Now, why he did that, I don't know, because maybe he was high on LSD, because you don't need to do that to cash your chips in. But when they asked for ID, he showed his father, his stepfather who died, was an IRS special agent, and he stole his credentials when he died, and he was impersonating his dead stepfather. And so naturally, the casino put two and two together, and it's called, and got him busted for impersonating a federal agent. And that was the beginning of why he decided to roll over to to cooperate with DEA. But anyway, also he and Picard. I'm trying to think how to summarize this story because there's so many offshoots from this. But he and Picard had a conflict because he was ripping Picard off. They were laundering money in the casinos, and I think he was ripping Picard off, and Picard was getting onto him. But see how it happened that he got in with Picard is this Gordon Todd Skinner. He'd always wanted to be a made man in the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, which is the hippie mafia, the entheogen LSD mafia. Okay, and he got to know Picard. He knew Picard was a big guy in the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. And it was like a little Italian guy that wanted to be a made man in the mafia. He told Picard that he knew Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett could get him a $400,000 grant to study drugs if he would appoint Skinner as the director of security for the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. And that they should move the LSD lab to one of his missile silos in Kansas, where they'd have better security and surveillance and so forth. So anyway, Picard made a huge mistake and fell for it. And he even took, they were both such con men. He even took Picard to a mansion in California and had Picard sitting out the car and said, I'm going to go in and talk to Warren Buffett and get your grant working for you, and he never was in with Warren Buffett, but these two guys, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Dirty Rotten Scoundrels with Michael Caine.
Yeah, Steve Martin and Michael Caine. Yeah.
They were like those two guys, and they were always competing with each other, except they were also big time drug dealers. So they were chasing women all over the world, and they were con men pulling all kinds of cons, but they were also the biggest LSD traffickers in the world. So, you can't make this stuff up. It's so bizarre.
Hey, Guy, before you dive too far into it, had any of this, had the spike of LSD or had LSD registered on DEA's radar to the point of where you're trying to figure out where it was coming from before Guy walks into headquarters? Or is that kind of one of those things that's kind of like, shit, we had no idea this was going on here?
I don't think DEA had any idea what was going on there. We were just really lucky. If Picard had not made the huge mistake of bringing this crazy Gordon Todd Skinner into his organization, I don't know if we ever would have caught him, because Picard was a brilliant guy. He had perfect cover. And, we were lucky because Skinner and Picard got in this conflict, and Skinner ratted him out to avoid any charges for impersonating a federal agent, and also this suspected death of the guy in his missile silo.
Well, were Picard and Guy, were they management and labor, or who was doing all the production of LSD?
Well, how this worked, there were actually two missile silos involved. The missile silo in Wamego was actually a cover. It was a decoy. The LSD was actually being produced in another missile silo in Carniero, Kansas, a little tiny town out near Salina, where you were. And Picard would fly in to Kansas City, and he'd drive out there, and he'd spend hours producing this LSD at the Carniero missile site. And then he would, so that if the theory was if the police ever, first of all, Kansas is a great place because there's not that many trees and surveillance you can pick up on easy. Also, you don't have a neighbor smelling chemical fumes, out there in these farmhouses. And, but anyway, he was actually producing the missile silo at another location at this Carniero missile site, which was owned by another guy who died, who committed suicide. And there's some suspicion on that, what happened there. And when he died, they went into panic mode because Skinner knew that this kid's dad would be coming out to the missile silo, in probate. And so it was an emergency. They had to move the LSD lab from the Carniero missile site. Well, fortunately for Skinner, at this time, when this guy died who owned the missile site in Carniero, Picard was in England. And so Skinner just went out there on his own with some of his assistants and moved Picard's lab to the Wamego missile site and put it in storage. And of course, Picard was furious about this. And then he talked, Skinner, as an undercover informant for DEA, then talked Picard into coming back to pick up the the LSD lab, which had huge quantities of agonamine tartrate, or actually, it turned out it was ergocristine, a precursor chemical. And so when Picard came out to pick up his lab with Apperson, that's when we took him down. And actually, it was your colleagues at the Kansas Highway Patrol. We had to make the bus so that we wouldn't show federal involvement. But we made a mistake. We didn't know at the time that Picard was a marathon runner. So we had these two Kansas Highway Patrolmen set up to arrest Picard and Apperson. Apperson was driving this huge truck. I think it was a Ryder truck. I forget. Anyway, type of truck. And Picard was following him in a silver Buick as a follow vehicle, and they had walkie-talkies so they could communicate. And what they didn't know is while we were doing surveillance on him, we went into the store behind him and got the same kind of walkie-talkies so we could hear what they were saying. And they went into a store in Kansas and bought these walkie-talkies, and the agents, Roger Hanslick and them went in behind him and said, "Hey, what kind of walkie-talkies did he buy?" And they bought the same ones so we could hear what they were doing when they were loading up the Ryder truck. And so anyway, the mistake we made, though, is only one of the two Kansas Highway Patrolmen had a dog. Okay. And unfortunately, the one with the dog is the one who pulled over Apperson in the truck. Okay. The one who went to pull over Picard in the car, Picard drove off the road and jumped out and ran into the Kansas woods. And this other Kansas trooper, he was in good shape and he made a valiant effort to catch him, but he couldn't catch the marathon runner. So now we had a scene that was reminiscent of the U.S. Marshals movie, The Fugitive. For 2 days, this Picard is in the Kansas woods, and we don't know where he is. We have 50 officers looking for him, and hounds, and the helicopter with infrared. And Picard was so smart, he would hide in the drainage tunnels under the bridge so that he couldn't his infrared signature couldn't get picked up. But we had a good old boy Kansas farmer actually caught him. The word was out, all the farmers out in that area, that we had a fugitive on the run. And there was this good old boy. He was a World War II veteran. He thought the days of excitement in his life were over, and he comes out, and Picard's sitting in a truck on his farm. And Picard comes out and says, "Hey, my car broke down. Can you help me out?" He says, "Well, yeah, I got a tractor here. I'll put your." I said, "Oh, no. I need a ride into Manhattan. Can you give me a ride into Manhattan?" And so this farmer. I'm trying to remember his name. All of a sudden, my mind's gone blank. Anyway, a good old boy farmer. He says, "Yeah, I'll help you out, but let me go tell my wife, and then I'll give you a ride into Manhattan." Well, he goes in, and his son had already alerted him there was a fugitive, and he called the sheriff's office and they came rolling out, in the sheriff's office and the Wamego police. I think there was two different units. They finally caught him because he started to run again, but they were in squad cars now driving across a cornfield, and he finally threw his hands up and said, "I'm tired and cold. I give up." And so that's how the wizard was finally captured.
Back to Apperson, he was a little bit confrontational when he got out against the canine officer, right?
Right. And he was going to
read in your book.
And Apperson was going to run, and the Kansas Highway Patrolman said, "You see this dog? You think you can outrun the dog?" Is my understanding. And so he said no, and he gave up. But originally he was confrontational, and I think he was thinking about running, but he looked at that dog and changed his mind.
A dog will change your mind. That's right.
Yeah, the old saying is, "You can run, but you're just going to go to jail tired, pal. Just turn yourself in." So
probably with a bite mark.
But let me tell you, but there's some the thinking behind this too. Is you're right. The longer they're out there without food, without shelter, without water, you wear them down pretty quickly. 2 days is not a long time, but it's a long time when you don't have any of the necessities you need to survive. And a lot of these people, and it's cold. Pretty soon they're like, they turn themselves in because they want to get warm or they're hungry and they need food.
Yeah, he's not quite as smart as he thought he was. And back to what you said about Morgan, you had a question a while ago about did DEA think that this guy was on the radar, was the largest producer of LSD in the world. I remember back in my days, I never worked an LSD case. We did work some ecstasy cases, and the drugs were being produced over in Denmark and other parts of Europe. And I think I'm thinking the presumption was that the LSD was coming over from Europe to the United States, when in reality, we're producing almost the entire world's supply of LSD right here in the U.S. and in Kansas.
I had no clue. No clue. You know,
How were they distributing it, though? What was their means of distribution? Was it all going? How much of it was, like, percentage-wise? How much of it was going to the U.S.? How much of it was going overseas?
well, we don't know exactly, but a huge portion of it was going to the Netherlands. And there was a guy named Petaluma Al who would, LSD is all you need is a little tiny, 100 micrograms to get high. So you can have a huge quantity. He would hide it in a briefcase under, a false briefcase, and he would bring it to the Netherlands and distribute and bring the money back in Dutch guilders for Picard and Skinner. And then Picard and Skinner, they would go. This is kind of entertaining too. There's so many of these stories I could go on. Picard and Skinner would fly to Las Vegas, okay, and they would pull up at one of these high roller casinos in a limo with like a dozen strippers in the car, and they would go in and they would give each of these strippers like $50,000 in Dutch guilders, and they would say, "You go in and you just gamble for 10 minutes." Well, first of all, they go to the casino, they take the Dutch guilders, they go in and cash in for chips. And then they take the chips and they would just gamble. They say, well, I don't care if you lose 5,000, just bring me back most of the 50,000, and come to room 111 in an hour and give me the cash. And so that's how they laundered a lot of this in these casinos doing that routine,
And they've converted it from guilders to U.S. dollars.
Yeah, because that's how they converted their guilders to U.S. dollars. And then also another bizarre aspect of this case is, while this Todd Skinner has this missile silo in Wamego, he goes to a local strip club, and there's a gal there. Her name's Crystal Cole. In the book, I called her Dorothy Stripper because when I was writing this book, my publisher didn't want me to use her real name because she wouldn't sign a release in my interview with her. But anyway, her name was Crystal Cole, and she would do this bondage stripper routine, where she'd dress up like Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz with pigtails and whip herself on stage. And I guess Gordon Todd Skinner comes in, and he sees this crazy
Wait a minute.
routine.
I know. I saw her. No, I'm just kidding.
You probably did.
Well, the funny thing is, my cousin, the dentist in Topeka, told me he actually saw one of her routines out there. But I had some of my old buddies in Kansas telling me about it. But anyway, he fell in love with her, and he would go in there and spend hours talking to her, and not getting lap dances, but just he'd pay her, big money, just sit in the room and talk to him. And she thought he was brilliant, And so then he buys her a Porsche because he says, "Oh, you shouldn't have a car like this. Quit your job as a stripper here and come out to the missile silo with me." And he bought her a Porsche, and she was kind of like the director of entertainment out there at the missile silo. And she'd wear these bikinis and a gas.
Bet she was.
And you see pictures of her, in the book. She's wearing a gas mask and a bikini, and so you had all these bizarre characters like her. And she, matter of fact, after this case got over, she started a website. And because she's wrong, she started a website where she would show people how to extract dimethyltryptamine off of the Sonoran Desert toad and get high with that. And she had her toad she'd do shows with. And she was talking about, she has a website. She's kind of like you, Steve. She has her podcast, and or not podcast, but for years she had this Entheogens website, for that community, talking about the wonders and how great hallucinogens are.
Wow. Now, is she the one that another young man started having an affair with her that led to a kidnapping and a torture?
Oh yeah, this is trying to think how to explain this. Anyway, she and Todd Skinner, after Todd Skinner rolled over and became a DEA informant, we had to hide him out, and they went up to Oregon, or I think Washington or Oregon, I forgot. Anyway, they went to the West Coast, and poor Carl Nichols, he must have been pulling his hair out trying to handle this troublesome informant, because Skinner started impersonating a medical doctor and prescribing drugs for women. He told everybody in this place that he was at that he was a doctor from England who was working on HIV, and he was actually prescribing drugs. So
The IRS agent thing wasn't working for him, so he kind of
yeah,
decided to
yeah,
become a medical doctor.
yeah. And so then they had to move him again, down to New Mexico or somewhere. I forgot where it was, but anyway, this gal, this Crystal Cole, she goes and she's with him, and they're using, he gets back into the drug world again, which you're not supposed to do. We finally got Picard convicted, and then after Picard was convicted, instead of straightening his life out and saying thank God I didn't go to prison, he goes down to Oklahoma City, back to Oklahoma where his mom is,
Oh,
and
whoa, 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 whoa! Stop! Oh, time out. He does all of this stuff, and he doesn't get jail time for all of this LSD.
no, because he cooperated, he got an immunity agreement. It's the only way we could catch Picard, so
Well, no, it wasn't Picard who walked away. You said after Picard got convicted, it was Guy that walked away with no jail time.
Todd Skinner.
I mean,
Yeah,
Todd. Yeah, Todd.
yeah, because Todd Skinner testified in court against Picard and helped to get Picard convicted. And
And what did Picard get for jail term?
Picard received 2 life sentences in federal court, and it was the longest trial in Kansas history because during the trial, Picard kept trying to say he was really like a secret agent working undercover for the CIA, and had to bring Judge Bonner in and CIA people to testify that he really wasn't a CIA agent, that this was all BS. And anyway, the trial itself was a whole other story. It was really bizarre. And
It was like an 11-week trial, right?
oh yeah, I can't remember exactly, but it was long. It was the judge said it was the longest trial in Kansas history that he knew of. He said, but for this Picard doing, claiming all these things, this had been a 3-day trial. It was just a LSD lab and a Ryder truck. But Picard kept trying to argue that he was really working for the government to try and make it a better world. And but anyway, getting back to this Crystal Cole. So now Picard is convicted, and Todd Skinner and Crystal Cole, they go back to Oklahoma, and they start a cult group in Oklahoma where this Todd Skinner is like a Catholic priest. He's up in front in a chalice, and he gives these communion wafers to all these kids for drug and sex parties. And the communion wafers are filled with LSD.
Mhm.
And
Oh my
and then
God!
and then he finds out that this young handsome guy, this really nice guy, Brandon Green, he looks like a beach boy. He blonde hair and blue eyes, real handsome kid. I think he was only 18 or at the time, and he finds out that this Brandon Green is fooling around with his wife, and he takes and gives Brandon Green a knockout drug instead of LSD. So Brandon Green wakes up in this hotel room in Tulsa, and he's tied up naked and gagged, and this crazy Skinner tortures him for a week. I mean, he's injecting LSD into his penis. He's injecting parasites into him. He shaved all the hair on his body for an entire week. He gives him terrible torture, and the kid's suffering tremendously. I mean, he pulled on his penis so hard that cartilage cracked. It was just horrendous what he did. Well, anyway, they tortured this kid for a week. And then they decide, well, he's almost dead. Let's just drop him off in the desert in Texas. And they drive him down to Crystal Cole and Skinner, and this other guy named Hawk was helping him out. They drive him down there, and they drop him off near Texas City, Texas, in the desert. And Brandon Green, he manages to crawl like half a mile to the edge of the road. They left him for dead. And a policeman finds him and brings him into the hospital emergency room and saves his life. They said another 15 minutes, they thought he'd be dead. And they interviewed him. And then while they were while he was being tortured, this Crystal Cole, she's so crazy. She has this mystic robe she's wearing. She's chanting over his dying body, praying like he's a sacrifice to Satan or something. It's just Unbelievable.
Sick people. And doesn't Brandon Green, of course, I read this in the book, so this was back when you wrote the book. It sounded like he had lifelong issues with his health because of the torture they administered to him. I mean, it was horrific, some of the things I read about in there.
Yeah, it's well, I talk to Brandon regularly, and he's a friend of mine now, and he's doing real well now, and he has some real cute little kids, and he. I don't know where he's living now. Well, he's in Oklahoma, but he was originally from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and they've interviewed. There's a movie producers interviewed him and myself about making a film about this, and about Todd Skinner, and they're talking about titling the film Psychonaut. Whether this comes to fruition or not, I don't know. We'll see. But
Has anybody optioned your book yet, or put a script together to option?
No, not yet. But they interviewed me for 5 hours in L.A., so I don't know. We'll see. The movie.
Yeah, they sucked your brain dry, and they're going to take it and make a series on Netflix and make a ton of money and pay you a $500 consulting fee. That's
Probably.
The way it works in Hollywood, pal.
Probably. Well, I just hope if they do that I can get some young, good-looking guy to play me like Steve Lucky in his series.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Well, maybe you get a Pedro Pascal like Javier got. He's the heartthrob.
So give us the aftermath. I mean, because one of the biggest things out of this, though, too, is when did DEA and you guys on the case and watching the intelligence, when did you finally realize the scope of this investigation? Like you were saying, Steve, it was an 80% reduction in the supply of LSD. How did you come about determining that? And when did it become apparent to you that it was this big of an operation?
Well, of course, informants always tend to embellish, so you never know. But the amazing thing was, there's some people, a lot of these entheogen people, they try and say that DEA was embellishing and that it really wasn't that much LSD and everything. Well, I'm not a chemist, but the DEA chemist told me that he had enough precursor chemicals to make 2.8 billion doses of LSD. That's enough LSD to get every man, woman, and child in the Western Hemisphere high, And, the entheogen people, they try and argue that, we're embellishing on this. But I don't know, because I'm not a chemist, but I can tell you this. LSD seizures dropped by over 90% for 10 years after this bust, and to me, that speaks volumes. I don't think it's just a coincidence, that was the case.
I'm looking at two charts you had in the book. The first is LSD emergency room mentions. So Picard and Apperson were arrested November of 2000. And it looks like the emergency room mentions at that time were 2821. I guess that's per year. Would that be right? And then,
yeah, I think it dropped from I think the year before Picard was busted, it was 5,000 emergency room mentions. And the year after he was busted, it was 800 and some. So that's like a five-fold decrease in emergency room mentions for LSD.
And you look at the number of LSD arrests, and I'm assuming this in the United States. It's got to be because it's a DEA source. Dropped from 100 during his time of arrest, where in 2002 it dropped all the way down to 22. I mean, holy cow! This guy was responsible for the vast majority. Just like Pablo had 80% of the cocaine market, this guy had 90% of the LSD market. It sounds like.
And the difference is, the reason I think this case is so significant is because, if you arrest Pablo Escobar or a big drug lord in cocaine or heroin, they just get replaced. I mean, it hurts them, but they just replace it with a new guy. Whereas with LSD, there's not that many people who know how to make LSD. It's very complicated. So you take out a guy like Picard, and it really makes a difference, because it's a very specialized skill, and not many, very extremely few. Some chemists told me they thought there were only a dozen guys in the world that would have the knowledge to make it on the quantities and quality that Picard did.
Tell us about it. What is it about lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, for you, those inside baseball term there? What makes LSD so difficult to produce compared to other drugs?
Uh, well, I'm not a chemist, so I can't tell you exactly, but is the formula and the precursor chemicals needed to produce it require a talented chemist. Unlike methamphetamine, you could train a biker gang member how to make it. And that's the difference. When it comes to drugs, as you guys are well aware, but the listeners may not be, uh, you basically have uppers, downers, and all arounders. You have the uppers like cocaine and methamphetamine, that stimulate. You have the depressants, the opiates, heroin and fentanyl that depress. People are more likely to get violent with stimulants. The depressants, though, are more likely to kill you, the fentanyl. But there's this third category of hallucinogens that people don't get as I do credit Picard in his statement. People don't get as violent with hallucinogens like they do with stimulants and depressants. But hallucinogens make you see things that don't exist. And you can be driving a car and see a dinosaur run across the road. And
Hey,
there
Jack
are
Daniels will do that too.
Yeah. Or see a naked man crawl into your patrol car and attack you.
That's right.
you
Sorry.
know, but there are some incidents of violence, although they're rare. They had in Virginia, they had a high school kid took just 5 or 6 LSD pills, and then he came out and shot a female police officer with a rifle. There are some incidents of violence, and people, in the 60s, you had the people jumping off of buildings thinking they could fly, taking LSD. So, although you may not have the same level of violence that you see with cocaine and methamphetamine, it still is a real danger to society. Although the entheogen supporters think that, it makes you reach a spiritual level that for society would be much better off. But I don't think society would be better off for the whole country to be high as a kite, seeing things that didn't exist.
Let me talk to you then about the book because you wrote the book. When did you get the idea to write the book? And what possessed you to write the book? I mean, obviously, this is like Breaking Bad and James
Mhm.
Bond, some just stuff all rolled up into one. What point did you decide? Hey, I'm going to use my journalism degree and I'm actually going to do something with it. I'm going to write a book.
Well, hopefully, I think I'm a much better cop than I am a writer. But I decided I had to put this. I had to save it. Also, as a tribute to Carl Nichols and Roger Hanslick, who did a lot of really good work to make this big case. I thought that this needed to be documented because it was so unusual, and people needed to be made aware of what happened, because it was really significant, all these events. I mean, we didn't have a lot of shootings or anything like you do in a lot of DEA cases, but, we had people dying from overdoses and this kid tortured in Oklahoma and a lot of other really unusual events. So I'm sitting on the ranch and I'm sitting at my ranch in Arizona, couple years after I retired. And I thought, hey, I got some free time. I might as well document all this.
And I mean, you're being very humble about this whole thing. This is a significant case in the fact that it such a major reduction. I read in your book you quote, oh Billy, the sack up there.
In Kansas City,
Yeah,
Billy
Billy.
Tubbs.
No, he went to St. Louis to be the sack down there, and I think he retired from there.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah.
you know what I'm talking about. I
Yeah.
just can't think of his name. He's a friend.
All of a
and I
sudden,
can't
my
think of
name's
his name.
gone blank with it too. He's a good guy.
Absolutely, he's like kind of a legend within DEA. But I mean, he came out and he was attributing a reduction of as much as 95% in the availability of LSD worldwide. So that's why we wanted to have you on here and talk about this case, because most people have never heard of it. But the significance of the investigation, I mean, we just explained the whole thing to you. This is something that had a lasting effect, a good positive lasting effect.
See, LSD is the strongest of all the hallucinogens. You have you have mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms that give you a buzz. You have peyote. You have DMT that you get off the snoring desert toad. You have all these different types of hallucinogens. But LSD is by far and away the strongest of all the hallucinogens. Peyote buttons that you can get a buzz from, but LSD is the strongest. And the thing about LSD is you only need 100 micrograms. That's what, 1/10,000th of a gram, to get a buzz off of it. And so you can make huge quantities, which is what Picard was doing at a relatively low cost and make a fortune. Now, Picard was trying to say that he was doing this to enlighten the world. But, this guy, he was making millions off of this, and he was living the high life, having, $1,000 bottles of wine at the Las Vegas casinos and chasing women. So he's not the spiritual Buddhist monk who was trying to save the world.
Billy Renton. Oh,
Yeah,
just
Bill
found his
Renton.
name in
That's
your book.
right.
Billy
Yeah.
Renton.
Such a good friend of mine. What was his name again? Yes.
I'm sorry, Billy. If you hear this, I apologize, buddy.
Oh, hey, but so just a couple quick questions before we close out on this too. But was there anything that triggered? I mean, the chemicals they had to be buying. I mean, you talked about the precursor chemicals, like there was enough there to make all these billions of doses. But did that trigger anything? Any notifications? Because we know that with certain chemicals to make meth, or after the Oklahoma City bombing, buying ammonia nitrate, fuel oil, things like that. Things like that started triggering notifications. Was there anything that triggered a notification to DEA or somebody else that all of these chemicals were being bought?
Well, see, this is how Picard was so brilliant. He went over to Europe and he found 3 formulas for LSD. And I think one was in Hungarian and there were 2 other languages, and he had them translated. And he found out, see, DEA keeps a spotlight for ergotamine tartrate, ET. But he found a way you could use ergochristine to replace ET and produce LSD. And that was the key, because ergochristine wasn't watched as tightly as ergotamine tartrate. And he was able to purchase 10 containers of this ergochristine. Well, actually more than that. And that was another thing. Todd Skinner had taken possession of all that ergochristine, which gave him the power to control things. And matter of fact, it was like pulling teeth to get all those vials of ergochristine away from Todd Skinner. He kept hiding them different places and wasn't cooperating. And we eventually, we think, hopefully, we got them all back. But
no honor among thieves. There, it's all about the money.
Exactly.
And that stuff's pretty expensive, isn't it?
Oh yeah, they say $100,000 for one of those containers. Wow. And he had 10 of them. But he was getting. Carl Nichols would and Roger Hanslick could give you a much better on the details on this, but he was getting those from organized crime figures, is my understanding, I think in Chicago. And that was one of his concerns when he met with Todd Skinner. He said, this puts us in a very dangerous position. I need to get that ergochristine, but he had contacts to get the ergochristine to him. And I think it was organized crime.
And to think all of this, my little area of Chapman, Kansas. Well, I'm glad you ended this scourge but as a kid, I remember we'd ride bikes during the summer. You would go ride by some of these missile silos that were out there. You'd take a day trip, you go find, and never thinking. But, they've turned those into a cottage industry. They've turned those into little condos. They've turned them into like almost an Airbnb type of thing. You can go stay in a missile silo for the weekend, not knowing that hey, while we're here, who would have thought, hey, let's make LSD? But again, like you say, but here's this guy, brilliant as everything, but guess what? Dumb as fuck as well, too, because in the end, guess what? All of the bright guys, all of the criminal masterminds, you may not catch every one of them, but you know what? You catch a whole lot more of them than they think they're the smartest people in the room until they're caught.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you mentioned Picard got 2 life sentences. What about Apperson? Do you recall what his
Apperson, I think he got like 16 years. I haven't checked on Apperson, but he received less time than Picard. But Picard was released about a year ago after doing
Wait a minute. How do you get 2 life sentences and get released? I mean, somebody did we redefine the definition of the term COVID? Oh, fuck me, COVID.
Yeah. See, Picard's an old guy now. He's 76, and he used the COVID thing to get out of prison. They released him because of COVID.
Unbelievable. Yeah, and you talk about a danger to the community. That's why you don't let people out of prison, because they're a danger to the community. This guy has repeatedly been arrested. I think he said a dozen arrests, including carrying a firearm. And he's the largest producer of LSD in the world. And we determined that he's not a danger to our freaking society.
Well,
Unbelievable.
Normally, when a guy gets old, they kind of lose their testosterone somewhat, and they're less violent. If you had a guy who was a bank robber, I could see it. But the trouble with Picard is it's his brain, it's his knowledge.
It's his chemist.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
It's a formula.
He's not like a guy who in a heat of emotion, beat a guy to death or something because he's fooling around with his wife, and now he's an old guy. He's not going to be a repeat offender. This guy, his danger is his knowledge. And I just pray that we don't see another round of LSD hitting the streets. And you know what he's doing now? He's a celebrity like you are, Steve. He does presentations all over. He goes to these entheogen groups, and they hold him up like the big guru. They honor him. And they talk about how draconian the drug laws were to put this nonviolent offender 2 life sentences, and a nonviolent offender. But then they don't realize in the federal trial, we had 2 people testify that he was looking to develop a toxic poison like Breaking Bad or the ricin to kill a couple to take out an informant in his organization. So this guy was plotting murder, but they talk about him as being nonviolent and no danger to society.
That just shows you how idiotic we can be. Yeah, it's just unbelievable. We ought to take a look at the CDC site to see if LSD is on the rise again. That might coincide with the time of his release.
Well, I'll tell you what, that would be interesting to find out is who's keeping tabs on this guy, because you made a great point, Guy. The thing is, it's not about the physical ability. Like you see this too. We've seen this in serial killer cases, other stuff. Over a period of time, it wanes, their ability to carry out the crimes. But this guy, he did everything with his brain. And I doubt that in prison, he just sat there and intellectually masturbated. He probably was boning up on stuff, reading stuff, keeping himself in tune. I have no doubt. I'll tell you what, if you're out there listening, DEA, because I know somebody is, maybe we ought to find Captain Picard, Mr. Picard, and just pay him do a knock and talk, see what he's up to. I'll go. You want to go, Steve? Let's go do it.
Well, he's written a book called The Rose of Paracelsus. He is a brilliant guy, and I tried to read his book, and I don't think I have the cognitive capabilities he does, because I lost interest pretty quick. But it gets into all this spiritual stuff and talking about the 6 chemists in the world who were visionaries to produce LSD and save the world with entheogens.
It sounds kind of like the book that George Young wrote about the tuna.
Oh my God, the psychedelic tuna, and the name. When we interviewed him, it's like I read some of that. It's not so much that George's writing was above me. I just had no fucking idea what he was saying. Like, where are we going with this?
Might have had a little buzz on when he was writing it.
Well, yeah. Consider how much product went up his nose, that and everything else. But oh my good. So hey, now the other thing I wanted to ask you about too is you wrote a second book, and but actually you didn't write the second book. That book was first, and your Operation Trip to Oz was second. Is that correct?
No, I wrote Trip to Oz first.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I wrote Trip to Oz first, and then my publisher said, this is when they were having the school shootings and everything, and my publisher said, you used to be a firearms instructor for DEA. Have you considered writing a book about firearms? And I thought about it. I said, that would be a valuable book. So I studied. I did a lot of research, and I studied the 21 mistakes most frequently made by police officers and armed citizens also result in their demise. And I think our armed citizens kill more bad guys every year than the police do, And I studied these 21 incidents, and I put them into a book. And actually what motivated me to make the book was I have a cousin who's a dentist in Topeka, Kansas, and he has a little cottage behind his house. And this cousin of mine, he's a former captain in the Army. He's a really great shot. He's been a big game hunter in Africa. And you'd never think he would have a problem. But anyway, one day he hears screaming in the cottage behind his house, and his wife is back there screaming. And he grabs a little 380 semi-auto pistol and he runs back there. And there's a burglar who's broken into this cottage behind his house, and he pulls out this little 380 and says, "Freeze, don't move." Well, the guy's walking toward him, and the guy tries to jump him and take his gun away. And he's an older guy; he's in his 70s, and he he made the mistake. People don't really under stress, even though he's a fantastic shot. He forgot to take safety off on his pistol under stress, and he's pulling the trigger and it doesn't shoot. And now he's wrestling with this guy to get his gun. And fortunately, his brother, my other cousin, his big burly truck driver, runs in there and jumps on the guy and puts him in a headlock. And then my cousin Larry, the dentist, grabs a wine bottle and knocks the guy out with a wine bottle. And I told him, I said,
It
"Larry,
wasn't full, was it? He didn't waste a bottle of wine on this piece of shit, did he?
oh yeah." But
Use what you got available.
Larry, I said, your firearm skills weren't that great, but you were an ace wine bottle swinger. So
Nailed it.
Fortunately, it ended up okay. But it made me think, if even somebody like Larry, there's little things like people don't forget under stress, or like something I saw commonly in Dallas, people don't think your tactics are just as important. People think all you need is a high caliber pistol and you're a good shot and you're in shape. No, you need tactics. And like women come home and they find their house is broken into. And the first thing they do, which is the worst thing you do, they run inside to see what was stolen. Well, then there's a rapist in there and they end up getting raped or something. Or like my cousin, one of the things is you always want to take cover. Instead of running into the building, stay outside the building, wait for the police to arrive, and take cover behind a tree and cover the door. Little things like that can make all the difference in the world. And so that's what I wrote the book. And also, like, never bring an untested weapon into battle. Don't ever bring a pistol that you've never shot. There's little things like this, tactical things, cover and concealment, that are much more important, or just as important as your accuracy with a firearm.
You bring up a really good point. And I made a decision. I'm actually looking at another pistol, an FN6. You can get the law enforcement version once a year if you're retired from FN. They call it the individual purchase program, I think, or something. But that's one of the reasons, though, I transitioned to a Glock as my primary, everyday carry, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't have to think about the safety. It's the same trigger pull each time. You just reduce the number of things you have to think about. Because for me, I got to thinking is that, look, when you go from double action and then it's single action, then you have to think of three things. I mean, if you're flipping it off the safety, like when I used to
you off regularly, like
you flip me off regularly. But I would, for me, I carried like a Beretta. I would, or a Sig Sauer. I left the safety off because the first pull was double action. So I'd never left the weapon. I don't have any kids at the house, but that was one of the points I got to thinking about. Is like, hey, you want to reduce the number of things you have to think about should you have to draw and fire, and reducing safeties, making everything the same pull so that the trigger pull is the same, each time. And that's why when I looked at getting another weapon, or something I would want to change maybe for an everyday carry, for one thing, ammo is getting damn expensive, 40 calibers, but versus 9. But those are great points. You got to go to the range. You just don't. It's not like a car. You can drive a car, and cars are pretty much cars, not weapons. You got to go put, I'd say, at least 1,000 rounds through a weapon before I think you get to the point of where you go, yeah, I'm very comfortable carrying this. I know how it's going to operate. I'm a good shot. So just my 2 cents.
Well, I'll give you an example, and you can speak to this better than I can, Guy, because you're an instructor at the academy. But I was a certified firearms instructor with DEA also. When DEA agents go through the academy, they're estimated that they should fire a minimum of 10,000 rounds before they graduate, just to be proficient enough to carry a weapon in public. That's how serious all this is.
Yes, indeed.
Well, you got to be, because there's no taking a bullet back. Once it leaves the barrel, man, there is no oopsies and calling it back.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I carried a Glock, and sometimes I had a Sig Sauer as a great weapon also. I probably fired 40,000 rounds through it. Never malfunctioned once. And
I got the 239, the compact 40 caliber.
Yeah, Sig or Glock, either one of those you can't go wrong with. I can't testify about the other weapons. I haven't tested them that much, but I've been really happy with
100%.
DEA, I think, was the first federal law enforcement agency to issue semi-autos. And, the FBI for years had always had the philosophy 6 rounds for sure is better than 15 maybe. And they had all their agents carry revolvers. And it was kind of interesting. We started out with the SIGs and the Glocks out there at the range, and the FBI instructors were coming over looking, and they were actually counting the number of malfunctions. And when they saw that, a lot of the older semi-autos would jam a lot, but the SIGs, of course, now I'm talking about, this is a 1990s, or well, 1980s. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, and when they saw that this new generation of semi-autos, pretty rare that they'd malfunction, FBI switched over to semi-autos also.
Yeah, I come to think of, because I went through in '87 the academy, and we got the Smith & Wesson Model 10 revolvers. But by the end, and I was stationed in Miami, was my first post, and it wasn't long before I had one of the Smith 659s, 9mm.
Yeah, it took one of the troopers getting shot before they realized that we used to carry Smith & Wesson 686 on the patrol. He survived the shooting. In fact, when we had Mark Conboy on, Steve, that was the shooting we're talking, Jeff Hirsch. Yeah, it took them to transition then to semi-automatics, because this whole thing of, when I first started, it was ammo dumps. Then they finally went to speed loaders, but still, you get a good, reliable weapon having at least 12 to 15, they're available for you, plus one in the chamber. Anyway, we digress into a firearms course, which we could talk about. But hey, well, look, Guy. So let's close this out by asking, what are you doing now? Are you working on another book? Have you heard back from Hollywood in any movement on your the other book? What's going on with you?
Well, I'm kind of spoiling grandchildren right now.
It's a good job.
Spend most of my time. I'm actually retired now. Finally, instead of working at the ranch and writing books, I'm moving, to Arkansas here and going to settle down. And I haven't decided what I'm going to do with the next chapter in my life.
Didn't you run a security company for a while?
Yeah, the Gray Falcon International Security, but the trouble is that you have to. I had retired DEA and Secret Service and military guys that were wanting to go do training like I used to do international training, but if you don't have the right contact, and like we were going to get this one contract in Afghanistan to train the police there, and then I found out, well, your guys don't have domestic violence training. So, I'm thinking domestic violence training. So they hired a bunch of California police officers who had domestic violence training to do it. So I said, well, I'm getting out of this, But
in Afghanistan, so apparently they don't understand the way things work over in Afghanistan between a man and a woman. Huh?
Instead of hiring a bunch of former DEA and Secret Service and military guys who've been overseas, I think they put this contract out to a bunch of California police officers, because the guy who was writing the contract probably put some stipulation about the, domestic violence thing. Not that California police officers aren't a great group of guys, but to me, it was kind of ridiculous. And I said, well, that's it. I'm ending this business venture.
Unbelievable. That's a typical example of the United States trying to impose its values and standards on the rest of the world. As much as I agree with the domestic violence training, I think that's a good thing. But, we expect the world to come up to our standards.
Well,
we don't want to accept the way they live.
I can guarantee you, in many of those countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, places like that, domestic violence is not high on their list of things to solve.
Yeah.
And it's a sad fact, but that's the culture.
Well, I think we could look at what the Taliban's doing right now in Afghanistan.
Let's see. Can girls go to school? Can they hold jobs? No. Oh, okay. Gee, that's great possibilities for women over there. Anyway, that was a digression. You are allowed to drink on that one. So that is the fifth one, I believe. Hey, well, Guy, look, I got to tell you, man, this was, I love it because I didn't realize you were from Junction City. So, we could talk about all of this stuff. Hey, I got to ask you one question. Did you ever go to Slime and go eat at the Cozy Burger?
No, I never got the Cozy Burger. There's a chicken place in Abilene, Lena's Chicken House. I used to eat at a lot.
Yes, and I know where that was at. And and do you remember the Brookville Hotel?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, site of a famous murder too. They actually moved the Brookville Hotel to Abilene. They actually picked the whole thing up and moved it over to Abilene. No, Lena's Chicken House. They got the Eisenhower Center down there. Guys, Abilene, we're part of the Chamber of Commerce, the tourism committee for Abilene, Kansas, and North Central Kansas. Y'all come visit.
And for our listeners, remember when we were talking about an LSD case, and now we're talking about restaurants in Kansas? Sorry, I had to be a smart ass.
That's smart ass. Well, hey, Guy, I got to tell you, this was great, man. This was fun. This people can't see this. This is me saluting you. Say, first of all, thank you for your service to the country, from everything from the FBI to Dallas to the CIA to DEA, putting those books out there. And seriously, you got to get the books. So the first one is Operation Trip to Oz. Second one is 21 Deadly Mistakes. We will put those up on our website so people can go to our book list. They'll see that. Great stuff. And like I said, this is me saluting you. Thank you for your service there, officer, secret agent, soldier.
Yeah. And
well, tell them just go to Amazon to get the books if they want.
Oh, well, we'll link directly to Amazon. So the links on our site will take them directly to Amazon, and they can buy it from there. And that way you can retire more comfortably.
Yeah, and Guy, thank you so much for being on the show. You didn't even hesitate when I called you and asked you about it, and it was kind of funny that Morgan brought it up, and I'm like, wait, I think I know this guy, and sure enough, it was you. Literally knew the guy. But we wish you all the best in retirement, brother. It's take care of those grandbabies. I love spoiling the grandkids because I can get them high on sugar and send them home.
That's it.
Not my monkey, not my circus. Here you go, guys. There you go. Have fun.
That's right. Okay. So thank you for being here. Thanks for your service, brother.
Well, thank you, buddy. I'm really glad to see this podcast come out and gives the police a communication mechanism, to tell the other side of the story.
We don't tell the stories. We let you tell the stories. So you two don't go anywhere. You hang on. Everybody else, stay tuned for the debrief. If you're on LSD and I just started going, follow the yellow brick road, follow the yellow brick road, follow. That would work out really. Trip to Oz, by the way, the name of Guy's book. That was a hell of a trip. I mean, that was funny. But, Steve, something that just seriously pisses me off, and he made such a great point of this. You guys talked about this. This isn't a guy who aged out like a sexual predator or a serial killer. His brain is still working. They let this guy out because of, quote, COVID. He's supposed to be serving a life sentence. Apparently, life sentence doesn't mean life sentence anymore.
An illegal narcotic, especially something like LSD,
which is so complicated to make. It's not like, bathroom meth or something.
But they said there's only like 6 or 8 chemists in the world that have the proficiency to do this without hurting themselves and others. But the fact that he's responsible for 80 to 90% of the LSD in the world, and we let him out, I mean, what the hell are we becoming here? It's crazy. But you know what? And listening to Guy's story, he's humble because he doesn't want to take credit for what other people did, and you got to admire him for that. He did take the initiative to put a book out to describe the whole details about this. But you heard yourselves multiple times how he gave credit to the other people that are out there doing the work as well.
But I think his career was impacted by his how do you want to say, his interaction with a naked man in his squad car to start off his law enforcement career first day out?
But it makes such a good story after, in life after police.
Well, then he goes to be a CIA polygrapher, and it's like, no, you didn't. You did? Really? Let's polygraph you on that,
He's a man of many talents.
Oh man, but it was a good story though, and it's one of those things too. You just never know, right? I mean, you think seriously. I love being from a small town area. The town I grew up in, 1,500 people, just good people out there. You would never think what's going on. That Charlie Rich song, "What Goes On Behind Closed Doors." What's going on behind closed doors or closed missile silos out there? Because there were a lot of them. I remember as a kid going by them, riding bikes by them. There were, the Minuteman silos. Why? Because Kansas is in the middle of the United States and takes longer to hit it. So we have a, time to react and send missiles back. I never knew that till later. And it's like, damn, now they're condos and LSD factories.
Well, the other thing is, I think this chemist, I'm going to give the piece of shit the credit of mentioning his name here.
No.
I think he thought he was smarter than everybody else. So you come to a small area and he thinks just because you come from a small area, you're not as smart as anybody else. And he took advantage of the people living there, and he was somewhat creative in the fact that using the silo to produce LSD, but also hiring local law enforcement off-duty job as an off-duty job to provide protection on the perimeter of the silo site, create the appearance of a legitimate company. But he just thought he was smarter than everybody else. And his happy ass still went to jail, didn't it?
Yeah. And you know what, too? It's one of those things here, pro tip to you universities out there looking to hire people. Do a damn background check. Somebody who's got convictions and is already dealing dope and you want them to be your drug control policy advisor. We call that a fail. That's a fail.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? This guy, he'll be a recidivist. There's a big word for you, isn't it? You didn't think I knew that word, did you?
Well, I saw you write it out right before we started.
That's why
you were
I have
practicing
a
with
running on the side here. I can look shit up,
Yeah, I can look.
No, but a guy
make
like
shit
this,
up, look shit up.
Because of his ego and his superiority complex, his narcissistic attitude and makeup personality, he'll go back to prison before this is over with. Either that or somebody will kill him.
Yeah. He's too smart for his own good. But by the way, smart guy, guess where you're at? At least you were in prison, caught by the dumb guys, like us. So,
yep.
nanny, boo boo. There you go. All right. Well, hey, look, if you guys enjoyed this, just head on over to our website, gameofcrimespodcast.com. That's where we got guys. He's actually written a couple books. We put one there also on active shooters and stuff. So he's done some good work around that. But Trip to Oz, a trip down Fantasyland. But kids, don't do meth and don't do because you don't want to climb through a window of a police car naked, and don't do LSD. The trips are bad. Also, follow us on that thing called social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. But where you got to be, Murph, you got to be at patreon.com/Game of Crimes. Why?
Well, we got some great content over there. I mean, things like the Q&A where you can ask us anything. We haven't turned down a single question yet. You heard us make reference a little earlier about you can't make this shit up. It's just goofy stories that criminals do around the world and stupid calls that come in. We do the 991 or 119 or 911 or just pick a 919. I don't know.
Murph, just yell, open up your window and yell, help, call the police.
It's 911. What's your emergency? Where we test your investigative abilities to see if you can decide whether the call is legitimate or not. Is this a real murder? Is this a real crime? Or did the person calling in, is he the criminal?
And next week, we're going to see if Murph can actually dial 911. That'll be his test.
Well, I'm going to write down the palm of my hand. I just won't wash my hands anymore.
Just like recidivist, yeah.
But, we also have once a month, we have the Narco Meter. We rate a law enforcement movie that you guys get to select if you go to the Game of Crimes fan page on Facebook. We're going to post those, and then you guys vote on what you want. We'll post 3 movies on there. I think the one coming up this month is Al Pacino month, so we picked one there.
Yep,
which is a hell of a movie. I just finished watching it this morning. I had never seen the whole movie. I'd only seen the ending. It was a great movie.
But if you want to know what movie it is, it's actually not on the Facebook page. It's on our Patreon page. So we only post the poll on our Patreon page, which means you got to be in the club. So if you want to join the club, go over to patreon.com/Game of Crimes or go to paypal.me/Game of Crimes, whatever it makes it easier for you to support the show. But once again, Murph, this is a great episode. We've got another good one. We do have another good one coming up because we know what this one is because we're recording the intro for it right after this one. So, But you guys stay tuned, and we want to thank you guys once again for playing the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all. Whether it's LSD or meth, just don't do it. Game of Crimes.